You are not living in the present. You are watching a delayed version of the universe. Right now, as you listen to this, nothing you are experiencing is actually happening. Not the sound of this voice, not the light in the room, not even the thought forming in your mind. Everything you call now already occurred. It has already passed through space, through time, through layers of processing you will never feel. And only after all of that, it reached you. We rarely notice this delay because it has always been there, like the slight lag in a live stream, like a video that plays smoothly enough that your brain forgets it is buffering. Look at the night sky for a moment. Every star you see is not where it is. Some of them are already gone. Some exploded millions of years ago. Some collapsed into silence before life even appeared on Earth. Yet here they are, calm, bright, present. Or at least, they seem present. Because light does not travel instantly. It travels at a finite speed, a cosmic limit that physics calls the speed of light. But what if this speed is not a limit of motion? What if it is a limit of update? What if the universe is not slow to move, but slow to arrive? Everything you have ever observed has crossed that limit. Every color, every explosion, every shift in matter and energy. You have never touched the universe directly. You have only received its messages. And messages take time. This means something quietly unsettling. It means you have never seen the universe as it is, only as it was. Even the sun you feel on your skin is 8 minutes old. Even your own reflection in the mirror is delayed by fractions of a second. Even this very sentence reaches your awareness after your brain finishes decoding vibrations into meaning. The present, as you experience it, is already over. At first, this sounds like a poetic exaggeration, a philosophical trick, but physics does not disagree. There is no universal now, end quote. No single moment that the entire cosmos shares. Different observers experience different slices of time depending on their motion, their gravity, their position in space. Two events that feel simultaneous to you are not simultaneous somewhere else. In fact, there is no master clock ticking for the universe at all. What we call the present is not a moment, it is a local approximation, a fragile agreement between your senses and the speed at which information reaches them. Like watching a live broadcast from another continent. You call it live, even though it is always a few seconds behind. Now imagine that delay is not seconds. Imagine it is years, centuries, millions of years, because in cosmic terms, it is. And here is where the idea begins to feel wrong, uncomfortable, yet strangely familiar. What if reality itself has latency? Not metaphorically, not emotionally, but structurally. What if the universe runs ahead of us, continuously updating itself, while consciousness only receives the rendered frames afterward, like a massive server processing events in real time while we watch the replay? In that case, the speed of light is not the speed of reality. It is the speed of delivery. It is the bandwidth limit of existence. Everything beyond that limit may already be resolved, decided, finished. While we are still loading, this would mean the present moment you cling to is not a moment at all. It is a buffer, a thin layer of processed data between what has happened and what your mind can handle. Your awareness lives there, suspended, always late, always catching up. And this is the true conflict. Because if this is true, then none of your worries exist in real time. Every fear, every regret, every anxious thought about what is happening right now belongs to a version of the universe that has already moved on. You are not reacting to reality. You are reacting to its echo. And before we go any further, before this idea sinks deeper into the quiet parts of your mind, if you feel drawn to these questions, if this slow unraveling of reality speaks to something in you, take a moment now to support this space. Like the video, share it with someone who listens in silence. Subscribe to Whispers of the Universe. These small gestures keep this quiet place alive and allow us to keep drifting together. Now, let's continue, because the next layer is even stranger. If reality arrives late, then consciousness itself is not living inside the universe. It is living inside the delay. Your brain does not experience events. It reconstructs them. Light hits your eyes. Signals travel through nerves. Electrical patterns form. Your brain compares them with memory, expectation, prediction. Only then does awareness appear. By the time you notice something, the event is already gone. You do not hear a sound as it happens. You hear it after it has already vibrated through air, eardrum, nerve, cortex. You do not feel emotion as it arises. You feel it after chemistry has shifted, after signals have looped. Consciousness is not a window. It is a playback system. This is why reaction time exists. This is why surprise exists. This is why hindsight feels so clear. You are always behind yourself. And yet, subjectively, it feels seamless because the brain hides the delay. Just like a video platform hides buffering when it can. Just like a game smooths frames to maintain immersion. Your mind edits reality in real time, even though it never receives reality in real time, which leads to a subtle, dangerous illusion. The illusion that you are inside the present. In truth, you are inside a processed past. This is not pessimistic. It is not fatalistic. It is simply mechanical. Reality moves. Information travels. Consciousness receives. Always in that order. And once you see this, another thought begins to form. If consciousness always lives a moment behind, then what is the universe doing right now, beyond your reach? Is it calm? Is it chaotic? Is it already finished with questions you are still asking? There may be entire resolutions unfolding that you will never experience as they happen. You will only receive their afterimage. This does not make your life meaningless. It changes where meaning lives. Meaning does not exist in immediacy. It exists in interpretation. You are not here to control reality in real time. You are here to witness, to translate, to respond inside the delay, and perhaps that is why anxiety feels the way it does. Because anxiety is not fear of what is happening. It is fear of what has already happened. Before you fully understood it, you worry in the buffer. You suffer in the buffer. You replay things that are no longer there. But if the universe has already moved on, if the true present is forever out of reach, then urgency itself begins to soften. Nothing needs to be caught up to. Nothing is waiting for you to arrive on time. You are exactly where consciousness has always been. A quiet observer, watching the universe arrive, slightly late. And as this thought settles, another question gently opens without demanding an answer. If you have never truly lived in the present, then where, exactly, has your life been happening all along? Light is the oldest message you will ever receive. Every photon that touches your eyes tonight began its journey long before you were born. Some of them left their stars when Earth had no cities. Some when there were no humans. Some when there was no Earth at all. And yet, here they are, arriving now, or what you call now. We often speak of light as illumination, as something that reveals, as something that allows us to see. But light is not presence. Light is delivery. It is a courier crossing unimaginable distances, carrying fragments of events that are already over. By the time light reaches you, its source has changed or vanished entirely. When astronomers point their telescopes toward deep space, they are not looking outward, they are looking backward. They call this looking into the past, and we accept it calmly, almost romantically, as if the past is a place we can safely observe without consequence. But this phrasing hides something unsettling, because if every observation is delayed, then delay is not an exception, it is the rule. You have never seen a star as it is, only as it was. You have never seen the sun as it is, only as it was 8 minutes ago. And if that is true for objects millions or billions of kilometers away, why would it suddenly stop being true for things that are close? Distance does not create delay. Delay reveals itself through distance. Light does not slow down as it travels. It simply takes time, and time, once spent, is never returned. This is where the idea begins to tilt, because light is not special in what it does. It is special only in how fast it does it. Light is information, encoded in waves, carrying data about temperature, motion, composition, change. When light hits your eyes, it brings news, not reality. News is always about what already happened. Even the light reflecting off your own hand has already left your skin before you notice it. Even the face you see in the mirror belongs to a fraction of a second ago. Even this moment is stitched together from tiny delays your mind hides from you. You live surrounded by messages, arriving continuously, never synchronously. At first, this seems trivial, a technicality. Fractions of seconds do not feel like centuries. Milliseconds do not feel like millennia. But latency does not need to be large to be fundamental. A system does not become real-time simply because the delay is small enough to ignore. A live stream with half a second of lag is still delayed. It only feels live because your brain forgives it. The universe relies on the same forgiveness. What you experience as smooth continuity is not evidence of immediacy. It is evidence of efficient concealment. Your perception does not wait for perfect data. It accepts what arrives and fills the gaps. This is why movies feel continuous, even though they are frames. Why voices feel present, even though they are vibrations decoded late. Why the night sky feels still, even though everything is moving. You are not witnessing reality. You are interpolating it. And the deeper we look into space, the clearer this becomes. There are regions of the universe so far away that their light will never reach us. Not because it does not exist, but because the universe is expanding faster than that information can travel. Those places are not hidden. They are simply beyond delivery. They may be filled with galaxies forming and dying right now, but now will never arrive here. For you, they do not exist. Not because they are unreal, but because they are unreachable by information. This introduces a quiet boundary you rarely think about. Reality is larger than what you can ever receive. The universe you experience is not the universe. It is the universe within your information horizon. Everything beyond that horizon may as well be happening in another reality. And this boundary is not only cosmic, it exists everywhere, between neurons, between moments, between cause and awareness. Light reveals this most clearly because it is honest. It does not pretend to be immediate. It openly arrives late. But once you see this, another question begins to surface. If light is only a messenger, then what exactly are we seeing when we see? We assume vision is a window, a direct channel from the world to the mind. In truth, vision is reconstruction. Your eyes do not capture the world. They capture signals. Your brain does not display reality. It assembles a model. Color does not exist outside your perception. Neither does solidity. Neither does motion as you feel it. They are interpretations, best guesses. The brain takes delayed light, incomplete data, and past experience, and produces something stable enough to navigate. You call that stability the present, end quote. But stability is not immediacy. It is coherence. The world feels continuous not because it is delivered continuously, but because your mind demands continuity, which means something subtle but profound. Even if the delay were larger, even if reality arrived seconds, minutes, or years late, your mind would still call it now, because now is not a timestamp. It is a feeling created when incoming information is smooth enough to feel real. This is why the concept of latency is so dangerous. It does not break reality, it redefines it. If the universe operates ahead of perception, then what you experience is always a trailing edge, a moving shadow. You are never aligned with the source, only with the signal. And this is not limited to stars. It applies to everything that moves faster than thought. Emotions arrive late. Reactions arrive late. Understanding arrives late. You smile after the joy has already passed through you. You flinch after the sound has already struck your ears. You regret after the decision has already been made. Life does not wait for awareness. Awareness follows. This creates a strange inversion. We believe consciousness is the center of experience. But in a delayed universe, consciousness is downstream, not the origin. The receiver, which means that what you call the present moment, is not where reality happens. It is where reality is decoded, and decoding takes time, always. You might feel resistance here, a quiet discomfort, because if light only brings you the past, and perception only assembles what has already happened, then what exactly are you doing when you feel alive? Are you living, or are you watching? This question is not meant to be answered yet. It is meant to remain open, because as soon as we accept that light is a message, not a presence, another layer begins to reveal itself. Light has no awareness of being delayed. It does not know how old it is. It does not carry timestamps you can feel. Only you care about when something happened. Only consciousness assigns urgency, which suggests something quietly unsettling. Perhaps the universe does not experience delay at all. Perhaps delay only exists for the observer. If that is true, then latency is not a flaw in reality. It is a feature of perception. And that raises the next question, gently and inevitably. If reality is always ahead of us, and light is only the courier, then where exactly does consciousness live? Not in the universe as it is, but somewhere else. Somewhere between what has happened and what you are capable of understanding. And that place, that thin, invisible region, is where the story continues to unfold. The speed of light is often described as the fastest thing in the universe, a hard limit, an unbreakable wall. Nothing moves faster than light, they say. But this statement hides an assumption. It assumes that what matters most is motion. What if motion is not the real constraint? What if the true limit is not how fast something can move, but how fast information can be updated? Imagine a vast network, not wires and screens, but fields and forces. Every point in space constantly exchanging information with every other point. In such a system, speed is not about travel. It is about synchronization. Light does not merely move through space. It synchronizes space. It tells one region of the universe what has already happened in another. When a star explodes, the explosion does not instantly become part of the universe everywhere. It happens locally first, then, slowly, the news spreads. Until that news arrives, the rest of the universe continues as if nothing happened. This is not slowness. It is structure. In digital systems, this is called bandwidth, a limit on how much information can flow per unit time. When bandwidth is exceeded, systems do not break. They buffer. Updates queue. Frames wait. Reality, from the user's perspective, begins to lag. The speed of light behaves exactly like that. It caps how quickly the universe can inform itself about its own changes. And suddenly, the idea of latency no longer sounds metaphorical. It sounds architectural. Because if information cannot propagate faster than light, then the universe is never fully up to date with itself. There is no moment when all regions agree on what is happening. There is only local truth and delayed awareness elsewhere. From this perspective, the speed of light is not the speed of reality. It is the speed of coherence, the maximum rate at which separate parts of the universe can share a common story. Without that limit, the universe would not be stable. Causality would collapse. Effects could arrive before causes. The delay is not a flaw. It is what prevents contradiction. But it also creates something else: fragmentation. Each observer lives inside a slightly different version of events. Each point in space-time holds a different slice of the whole. There is no single frame that contains everything at once, no universal snapshot, and yet, subjectively, it feels unified, because your mind assumes unity. Your mind believes the world it receives is complete. This belief is not based on evidence. It is based on necessity. Without it, you could not function. So consciousness accepts the stream it receives and calls it reality. But what it is actually receiving is a partial update, a local sync. You are not connected to the entire universe. You are connected to a feed, and this feed has a refresh rate. That refresh rate is set by the speed of light. Every sense you have is downstream of it. Every observation is gated by it. You cannot see beyond it. You cannot think beyond it. You cannot act beyond it. Not because the universe forbids you, but because information cannot arrive faster, which means something subtle. Even if the universe were to change dramatically, instantaneously, everywhere else, you would not know. You would continue living inside the old version until the update reached you. And by then, the universe would already be something else. This is not hypothetical. It happens constantly. Supernovae occur without witnesses. Galaxies collide in silence. Entire regions evolve without ever being observed. For those regions, the events are present. For you, they are potential futures that will never arrive. Reality is unevenly distributed across time. And now, the thought sharpens. If the speed of light defines how fast information updates, then the present moment you experience is not the edge of reality. It is the edge of delivery. Like standing at the end of a long pipeline, receiving packets. Each packet complete, consistent, believable, but already outdated. Your sense of now is simply the newest data you have, not the newest data that exists. This reframes something deeply personal. When you say, "I didn't see it coming," you are being more literal than you realize. You couldn't see it coming. The information had not arrived yet. When you say, "It happened so fast," what you mean is, the update outran your awareness. Speed is not what overwhelmed you. Latency is. And yet, the universe does not rush to correct this. It does not try to eliminate delay. It enforces it. Because without delay, there is no order. Without order, there is no structure. Without structure, there is nothing to experience. Latency is what makes causality possible. But causality, in turn, ensures that experience is always late. This creates a strange asymmetry. Reality is always ahead. Experience is always behind. They never meet, which raises a quiet question. If the speed of light is the universe's update limit, and if consciousness lives at the receiving end of those updates, then what you call the present is not a moment in time. It is a bandwidth-constrained illusion, a negotiated compromise between what exists and what can be known. And once this idea settles, it naturally bends inward. Because the universe is not the only system with bandwidth limits. Your mind has them too. Neurons fire at finite speeds. Signals take time to propagate. Patterns must stabilize before they are felt. There is latency within latency, a delay layered on top of another delay, which means the world you experience is not just behind the universe, it is behind itself. And somewhere between these layers, between the cosmic update rate and the biological processing rate, consciousness appears. Not at the front edge of reality, but in the middle of a cascade, receiving, interpreting, catching up, If this is true, then the most important question is no longer how fast the universe moves. It is this: what happens in the gap between reality updating itself and awareness finally arriving? Because that gap is where everything you call life takes place. There is no shared now in the universe. This is not a metaphor. It is not philosophical language. It is a measurable fact. At this very moment, different parts of the universe disagree about what time it is. Not slightly. Fundamentally, what feels simultaneous to you is not simultaneous somewhere else. Two events you experience as happening together may be separated by minutes, years, or millennia, depending on where they are observed from. The universe does not keep a global clock. It cannot. Because for a clock to be shared, information would need to travel instantly, and nothing does. Every clock is local. Every now is private. When physicists speak about relativity, this is what they mean at its core. Not just time dilation, not just moving clocks running slow, but the collapse of a universal present. There is no single moment slicing cleanly across the cosmos. No master frame, no cosmic refresh button. Instead, there are countless overlapping timelines, each valid in its own place. Each observer lives inside their own present. And this is where the idea begins to feel unstable, because your intuition insists that now must exist. It feels obvious, undeniable. You feel it passing. You feel it slipping. But that feeling is not evidence of a global moment. It is evidence of internal synchronization. Your senses update together. Your brain stitches signals into a coherent stream. Your memory anchors one moment to the next. This creates continuity, and continuity feels like presence. But presence is not the same as simultaneity. Your body experiences a unified now because all of its signals arrive within a narrow window. That window is biological, not universal. It is calibrated to survival, not truth, which means the present moment you feel is not something you share with the universe. It is something your nervous system constructs for you, a functional illusion, a local alignment, like devices on the same network syncing to each other while being out of sync with the server. The universe does not pause to wait for you. It does not align itself to your awareness. It continues, unevenly, asynchronously, independently. Events happen. Information spreads. Observers catch fragments. This is why relativity does not feel strange in equations, but feels wrong in life. Because life depends on the belief that now is real. If now were truly universal, urgency would make sense. Timing would be absolute. Missing a moment would mean something was lost forever. But if now is only local, then urgency becomes contextual, relative. What you feel as too late may not be late at all. It may simply be late for you. And this is where the idea begins to twist inward. If there is no universal now, then what exactly are you standing inside when you say, "I am here"? You are not standing in time. You are standing in alignment. Alignment between senses. Alignment between memory and prediction. Alignment between expectation and incoming data. Your present is the narrow overlap where these alignments hold, a thin slice of coherence. But coherence is fragile. Delay increases, and the slice widens. Latency accumulates, and the illusion stretches. The present moment you experience is not a point. It is a window, and windows can be distorted. This explains something quietly profound. Why moments of shock feel unreal. Why trauma fractures time. Why boredom stretches minutes into hours. Why flow collapses hours into seconds. Time does not change. Alignment does. The present expands and contracts based on how well your system synchronizes. And now, the question sharpens. If there is no universal now, and if your present is a local construction, then reality itself is never fully present to you. You are always out of phase, always slightly misaligned, always late in some places, early in others. This is not because you are slow. It is because simultaneity is impossible. The universe cannot present itself all at once, so it doesn't try. It fragments, and your mind selects a fragment and calls it reality. This selection feels neutral, but it is not. It filters what you believe exists. Everything outside your alignment window feels abstract, distant, unreal. You care about what is synchronized with you. You ignore what is not. This is why distant suffering feels unreal, why future consequences feel faint, why past mistakes feel disconnected. They are outside your present window, not because they are unimportant, but because they are misaligned, which leads to a quiet realization. You are not experiencing reality as it unfolds. You are experiencing reality as it becomes coherent enough to be felt, and coherence always arrives late. This does not mean the universe is broken. It means it is honest. It does not pretend to be centered on you. It does not slow down to be experienced. It simply is, and your awareness floats inside a moving pocket of alignment, calling that pocket now into skill. But pockets drift, they shift, they dissolve and reform, which raises the next question, one that cannot be answered without turning inward. If the present is not a universal moment, but a biological construction, then what exactly is doing the constructing? Whatever is building your now is not the universe. It is something closer, something inside the delay itself. And that is where the next layer begins to take shape. Consciousness does not witness reality, it decodes it. This distinction is easy to miss because the decoding feels immediate, seamless, natural, but nothing about it is direct. When light reaches your eyes, awareness does not appear. When sound touches your ears, awareness does not appear. When pressure meets your skin, awareness does not appear. First, signals travel, then they transform, then they combine, then they are compared with memory, then they are predicted forward. Only after all of this does something like experience arise. By the time you feel anything at all, the event that caused it has already passed through multiple layers of translation. Consciousness is not the place where events occur. It is the place where events are rendered understandable. This is why awareness always feels slightly behind, not noticeably, but structurally. Reaction time exists because consciousness is late. Surprise exists because consciousness is late. Regret exists because consciousness is late. You never respond to an event as it happens. You respond to it as it finishes becoming interpretable. And yet, the mind works tirelessly to hide this delay. It stitches fragments together. It smooths transitions. It predicts what will happen next, so that when it does, the lag feels smaller. Your brain is constantly guessing the future, so that the present feels real. This guessing is not optional. Without it, perception would collapse into chaos. You would not see motion, only flickers. You would not hear melody, only noise. You would not feel continuity, only interruption. So consciousness does something remarkable. It builds a model of the world that is always a little ahead of what it has actually received. Not far ahead, just enough. This is how the delay disappears. You feel present not because you are synchronized with reality, but because your mind predicts reality forward and corrects itself when it is wrong, which means the present moment you experience is not reality itself. It is a negotiated compromise between delayed input and forward expectation, a constantly updated guess. This is why reality feels stable until something unexpected happens. When a sound is louder than predicted, when a movement is faster than expected, when an outcome breaks the model, in those moments, awareness jolts. Time feels strange. Moments stretch or snap because the prediction failed. latency revealed itself. And this brings us to a subtle but important realization. Consciousness does not sit at the edge of reality. It floats somewhere in the middle, behind events, but ahead of data. It lives in a narrow band where delayed signals and future expectations overlap. This band is not fixed. It shifts with attention. It shifts with emotion. It shifts with fatigue. When you are calm, the band widens. When you are stressed, it narrows. When you are afraid, it fractures. This is why fear feels immediate even when danger is past. This is why calm can arrive even when problems remain. Consciousness does not care about truth in real time. It cares about coherence. It wants a story that makes sense, and it will sacrifice accuracy to get one, which means something quietly unsettling. Your awareness is not optimized to experience reality as it is. It is optimized to experience reality as survivable. Delay is not eliminated. It is disguised. You are not late by accident. You are late by design. And once this is seen, another question begins to surface. If consciousness only receives processed information, and if it relies on prediction to feel present, then awareness itself is not anchored to the universe. It is anchored to interpretation. You do not live in the world. You live in your brain's best explanation of the world. This explanation feels intimate, personal, certain, but it is not guaranteed to be accurate. It is only guaranteed to be functional, which reframes something deeply familiar. When you replay a memory and feel emotion again, you are not revisiting the past. You are re-rendering a model. When you imagine the future and feel anxiety, you are not sensing what will happen. You are running a simulation. Consciousness is always simulating. It cannot stop, because without simulation, delay would be unbearable. This means your lived experience is not a stream of events. It is a stream of reconstructions. Reality happens elsewhere. Understanding happens here. And between the two, time stretches. This is where the idea of latency becomes personal, not cosmic, not abstract, immediate. Because if awareness only ever receives the processed past, and if it fills the gap with prediction, then what you call your life is not unfolding in the present moment. It is unfolding inside a buffer between what has happened and what you are able to know. And this buffer is not passive. It shapes meaning. It shapes emotion. It shapes identity. You are not the sum of what happens to you. You are the sum of how delayed information is assembled inside you, which raises a question that cannot be avoided much longer. If consciousness is a decoding layer, and decoding happens after reality moves on, then where, exactly, does choice take place? Not in the universe, not in the event, but somewhere else. Somewhere inside the delay itself. And that is where the next chapter begins to pull us. Reality does not arrive all at once. It arrives in stages. First, something happens. Then information about it spreads. Then that information is processed. Then it is interpreted. Only after all of this does it become experience. This sequence is not accidental. It is a pipeline. In engineering, pipelines exist to manage complexity. They break a process into steps so nothing collapses under its own weight. The universe appears to do the same. Events do not wait to be observed. They occur locally where conditions allow them. Only later do they become known elsewhere. By the time awareness appears, the pipeline is already full. Events are entering at one end. Interpretations are exiting at the other. Consciousness lives at the exit. It does not see the raw event. It sees the final product. This explains why the world feels stable, even though it is not. Why chaos rarely appears chaotic. Why motion feels smooth. The pipeline absorbs discontinuity. It buffers spikes. It averages noise. It hides delays. From the inside, it feels like immediacy. From the outside, it is clearly staged. You can sense this staging when something breaks, when a video freezes but the audio continues, when your body reacts before you understand why, when words reach you before meaning does. These moments reveal the structure. They show that experience is not a single process. It is a chain, and chains imply order. Reality happens first. Awareness happens last. Everything in between exists to make that delay livable. This becomes more apparent when you consider scale. On cosmic scales, the pipeline is vast. Light travels. Space expands. Information thins. On biological scales, the pipeline tightens. Neurons fire. Patterns stabilize. Predictions fill gaps. But the structure remains the same. No system experiences its own input instantly. Every system must process, which means the idea of real time is always relative to the pipeline length. For the universe, the pipeline spans light years. For the brain, milliseconds. But milliseconds are still time. Enough time for events to slip away. Enough time for meaning to change. This creates a strange inversion. We believe experience causes understanding, but in truth, understanding arrives after experience has already passed. We feel before we know. We react before we reflect. We decide before we realize we have decided. Choice, like awareness, sits at the end of the pipeline, which leads to an uncomfortable implication. If your decisions emerge after processing, then they are not born in the moment you feel them. They are the result of accumulated delay. You do not choose in real time. You choose in reconstructed time. This does not make choice an illusion, but it changes where it lives. Choice does not intervene in reality. It interprets it, and interpretation happens late. The pipeline continues whether you notice it or not. It does not wait for permission. Events flow in. Experience flows out. Your sense of control exists only in how you respond to what has already happened. This is why regret is so powerful. It feels like a chance missed, but nothing was missed. Pipeline simply delivered understanding after action. This is not a failure of awareness. It is the cost of having awareness at all. A system that experienced reality instantly would not need consciousness. It would simply react. Consciousness exists because delay exists. It is the layer that makes delay meaningful, which reframes something deeply familiar. When you feel overwhelmed, it is not because too much is happening now. It is because too much is arriving at once. The pipeline is congested. Signals stack. Interpretations queue. Meaning lags behind. Stress is not about events. It is about bandwidth. And calm is not the absence of events. It is the smooth flow of interpretation. Nothing needs to stop for peace to appear. The pipeline only needs to clear. This realization softens something. You are not failing to keep up with life. Life is simply arriving faster than you can decode it. And that has always been true. You have never lived at the front edge of reality. No one has. Everyone lives downstream, which raises a question that gently shifts the frame again. If reality flows through a pipeline, and if consciousness sits at the end, then what exactly is the buffer? Where does information wait before becoming experience? Because pipelines without buffers collapse. They need space to hold what has happened until it can be understood. And if such a buffer exists, then perhaps what you call the present moment is not a moment at all, but a holding zone, a temporary pause where reality waits to be felt. And that idea that the present is a buffer is where the next chapter quietly begins. The present moment is not where reality happens. It is where reality waits. Between what has occurred and what you are capable of understanding, there is a space, a holding zone, a pause that is never acknowledged, yet never empty. This space is the buffer. In digital systems, buffers exist to protect experience. They absorb delay so the user does not feel interruption. They hold incoming data until it can be rendered smoothly. Without buffers, systems stutter. Frames drop, audio tears, meaning fractures. The universe appears to rely on the same principle. Reality does not arrive in consciousness immediately. It arrives unevenly, at different speeds, from different distances, through different channels. Without a buffer, awareness would collapse under the weight of asynchronous input. So something holds it. That something feels like now. This granted, when you say you are living in the present, you are not naming a time. You are naming a function. The function of temporary containment. The buffer is not a place you move through. It is a place you remain inside, always. This is why the present moment feels oddly suspended, not moving forward, not falling behind. It feels like waiting. Even in moments of urgency, there is a subtle delay, a fraction of time where nothing seems to happen, yet everything is preparing to happen. That fraction is not empty. It is filled with data, sensations arriving, predictions adjusting, memories activating, meanings forming. The buffer is busy. It just doesn't feel like action. This is why boredom feels the way it does. Why impatience grows when nothing changes. You are not bored because nothing is happening. You are bored because nothing new is arriving. The buffer is full, but the input has slowed. Time stretches, not because the universe has changed speed, but because the flow into the buffer has thinned. And when too much arrives at once, the opposite happens. The buffer overflows. Moments blur. Details vanish. Memory fragments. This is why trauma feels timeless. The buffer is flooded. Information arrives faster than it can be processed. So it lingers, unsorted, unresolved. The present moment becomes heavy, not because reality is unbearable, but because the buffer cannot empty. This reframes something deeply familiar. You do not live in the present moment because it is special. You live in it because you cannot leave. You cannot access the raw event. You cannot access the future state. You can only exist where information is temporarily stored, before it becomes understanding. The buffer is the only place consciousness can survive. This is why meditation does not stop time. It slows the intake. It reduces the demand for updates. Lowering the need for new information, the buffer empties gently. And when the buffer empties, something strange happens. The present moment feels peaceful, not because the world has changed, but because the holding zone is no longer congested. The buffer reveals itself as spacious. This leads to an unsettling thought. If the present moment is a buffer, then most of what troubles you does not belong to reality. It belongs to the queue. Worries are not events. They are delayed interpretations. Regret is not the past. It is unprocessed meaning. Anxiety is not the future. It is a prediction stuck in the buffer. The buffer holds more than perception. It holds possibility. It holds stories your mind is trying to finish telling itself. And the longer those stories remain unfinished, the heavier the present moment feels. This is why closure matters. Not because it changes what happened, but because it clears the buffer. Understanding releases stored information. The moment lightens. But the buffer is not just psychological. It is structural. The universe itself cannot update everywhere at once. So information must wait somewhere before it arrives. That waiting is not random. It is governed by distance, speed, medium. Reality does not jump from state to state. It transitions. And transitions take time, which means the buffer exists everywhere, between stars and galaxies, between cause and effect, between motion and awareness. The present moment you experience is a local expression of a universal delay. You are not special for experiencing it. Everything experiences it. even the universe itself. If the universe were conscious, it would also live in a buffer, always slightly behind its own becoming. This may sound abstract, but it carries a quiet comfort. Because if the present moment is a buffer, then it is not the battlefield you think it is. Nothing essential is decided here. Decisions happened earlier. Outcomes will unfold later. The buffer is not where reality is shaped. It is where reality is received. And receiving does not require effort. This is why moments of stillness feel truthful. In stillness, you stop trying to interfere with the buffer. You stop forcing interpretation. You allow information to arrive and pass. The buffer does its job. But this raises a deeper question. If the present moment is only a holding zone, then where does agency live? Where does meaning actually form? It cannot live in raw events. Those are gone before you notice them. It cannot live in the future. That has not arrived yet. Meaning must live somewhere inside the buffer, but not everywhere inside it. Only at certain points, only when interpretation stabilizes. This suggests something subtle. The buffer is not passive storage. It is an active filter. It decides what stays long enough to matter. Most signals pass through unnoticed. Some linger. Some echo. The echoes become thoughts. The thoughts become identity. You are not made of events. You are made of echoes that remained in the buffer long enough to shape you. This is why certain moments define your life, while others disappear completely. Not because they were objectively important, but because they stayed. They occupied the buffer. They resisted clearance. And now, consider this carefully. If the buffer holds interpretations, not events, then freeing yourself does not require changing reality. It requires changing what you allow to linger. You cannot control what arrives, but you can influence what stays. This does not happen instantly. Nothing in the buffer does. It happens gradually, as understanding catches up, which means patience is not waiting for the future. It is allowing the buffer to empty at its own pace. This shifts the entire meaning of urgency. Urgency is not demanded by reality. It is demanded by congestion. When too much waits at once, everything feels critical. But when the buffer clears, urgency dissolves. Nothing is lost. Nothing was ever missing. Reality was simply ahead of you, and you were trying to run. This understanding does not remove pain. It repositions it. Pain is not proof that something is wrong. It is proof that something is still being held. The buffer has not finished its work. And once this is seen, another question quietly forms. The present moment is a buffer, and if consciousness lives inside it, then what happens to choice? Is choice made in the buffer, or is it simply revealed there? Does free will act, or does it arrive late like everything else? That question cannot be answered yet, because to approach it, we must first understand something even more unsettling. Not how the buffer works for individuals, but how it works collectively, how entire societies live inside delayed reality, how history itself is buffered, and how meaning spreads through time, long after events have already passed. That is where the next chapter draws us, quietly, inevitably, deeper into the delay. Time does not flow. It refreshes. This is difficult to accept because everything in you insists on motion, seconds passing, moments slipping, life moving forward. But what if that sensation is not movement at all? What if time is not a river, but a sequence? In cinema, motion is an illusion created by frames. Still images shown fast enough to convince the brain that something is moving. Between each frame, nothing moves. Nothing changes. There is only the next update. Time may operate the same way, not as a continuous stream, but as a series of discrete states. Reality updates itself, then updates again and again. What you experience as flow is simply the refresh rate. This idea is not new. Physicists have wondered for decades whether time is granular, whether there is a smallest unit of change, a fundamental tick beneath which nothing happens. But even without resolving that question, something becomes clear. Whatever time is, you do not experience it directly. You experience its output, just as you do not experience a computer's processor, only what appears on the screen. The screen updates. You call that movement. The universe updates. You call that time. But updates do not arrive instantly. They must propagate. They must be processed. They must be rendered, which means the refresh you experience is not the refresh that exists. It is the refresh that reaches you. Your sense of time is downstream. This explains something quietly strange. Why time seems to speed up as you age. Why hours vanish when you are absorbed. Why seconds stretch endlessly in fear. The refresh rate has not changed. Your access to it has. When attention narrows, fewer updates are registered. When attention expands, more updates are noticed. Time feels fast, not because it is fast, but because fewer frames are being recorded. Memory is the true measure of time. A day full of new impressions feels long in hindsight. A day of repetition collapses into nothing. Nothing moved differently. Nothing flowed faster. You simply logged fewer frames, which suggests something subtle. If time is experienced as refresh, then the present moment is not the cutting edge of reality. It is the most recent frame you have received, not the most recent frame that exists. Reality may already be several frames ahead, rendering itself, updating itself, becoming something else. While you remain on an earlier version, watching it load, this reframes urgency again. If time does not flow, then nothing is rushing past you. You are not falling behind. You are simply receiving at a finite rate. The anxiety of missing out depends on the belief that time is a river, and you are failing to swim fast enough. But in a frame-based universe, there is no swimming. There is only playback, and playback has no moral dimension. You cannot be early or late to a frame. You can only receive it or not. This idea begins to soften something deep. If life is not moving forward in a smooth line, then regret loses some of its grip. You did not miss a moment that rushed by. You reached the moment when it reached you. No sooner, no later. The same is true for insight. Understanding never arrives late. It arrives exactly when the frame becomes decodable. Before that, it is not hidden. It is undefined. This is why forcing clarity never works. You cannot understand something before its frame arrives. You can only wait for the update. Which brings us back to latency. If the universe refreshes itself continuously, and if information about those refreshes travels at limited speed, then consciousness is always watching a delayed playback, a slightly older version of reality. Do not live at the front edge of time. You live at the edge of reception. This also means something unsettling. If time is a sequence of updates, then causality is not as simple as cause then effect. Cause updates first, effect updates later. Between them is a gap filled with nothing you can experience. You feel continuity only because your mind bridges that gap, which means that much of what you call waiting is simply existing inside unrendered space. Time feels slow, not because nothing is happening, but because nothing new has reached you yet. The universe may be very busy ahead of you. You just have not received the frames. This changes how we think about patience. Patience is not enduring delay. It is accepting the limits of refresh. It is knowing that no amount of strain will make the next frame arrive sooner. And impatience is not eagerness. It is resistance to latency. A refusal to accept that experience is gated. This reframing touches something intimate. Your desire to control the future may actually be a desire to eliminate delay, to collapse the gap between happening and knowing. But that gap is where consciousness lives. Remove it, and there is no experience left. only reaction, which leads to a quiet inversion. Latency is not what separates you from life. Latency is what creates life as you know it. Without delay, there would be no anticipation, no memory, no reflection, no story. Everything would simply be, and nothing would be experienced. This is why the present moment feels so fragile. It is not anchored to the universe. It is anchored to your reception of updates. A fragile alignment between what has happened and what has reached awareness, which means the present can never be held. Not because it moves, but because it refreshes. The frame appears, and then it is replaced. You never occupy time. You only view it. This realization gently prepares the ground for something deeper. If time is not flowing, if it is updating, then the future is not ahead of you in space. It is ahead of you in frames, already existing as potential updates, waiting to propagate. And the past is not behind you. It is simply older frames that are no longer refreshed. You are not between past and future. You are between frames, and that is where the buffer lives. But this raises a more troubling question. If time is experienced as playback, then where does intention fit? When you decide something, are you choosing a future frame? Or are you simply becoming aware of a decision that is already updated elsewhere? To answer that, we must look more closely at causality itself, at how causes and effects propagate through delayed systems, at why consequences always feel late, and why responsibility feels heavier than it should. That is where the next chapter quietly leads us, into the strange terrain, where cause and effect dissolve into signal and receipt. Cause and effect do not touch. They never meet. We imagine them as adjacent, one event striking another, one action producing a response. But this picture is an invention of the mind. In reality, cause and effect are separated by distance, by processing, by delay. Between them lies a gap filled not with nothing, but with propagation. When something happens, it does not immediately become an effect. It becomes information. That information must travel. It must spread through space. It must interact with other conditions. It must be interpreted by a system capable of receiving it. Only then does an effect appear, and by then, the cause is already gone. This is why consequences always feel late. You say, "I didn't realize until afterward." In Friends, you say, "It didn't hit me until later." End quote. You say, "I knew it, but I didn't feel it." The grasp is with own-handed. These are not excuses. They are descriptions of latency. Understanding does not arrive with the event. It arrives after the signal has completed its journey. This delay is built into causality itself. In a universe with infinite speed, cause and effect could collapse into one. Everything would be simultaneous. There would be no waiting. But our universe does not allow this. It enforces separation. Causes happen locally. Effects emerge elsewhere, later, and consciousness, once again, lives at the receiving end. This is why the idea of responsibility feels so heavy. We hold ourselves accountable for outcomes we could not fully perceive at the time. We judge past actions with present understanding. But present understanding did not exist when the action occurred. The information was not there yet. The pipeline had not delivered it. This creates a quiet cruelty. We believe we should have known, but knowing requires data, and data arrives late. Causality is not a clean chain. It is a delayed broadcast, and this delay is not just personal. It is everywhere. A star collapses. Its gravity shifts. The structure of nearby space changes, but the rest of the universe continues unaffected until that information arrives. For millions of years, distant regions behave as if the collapse never happened. The cause exists. The effect does not. Both are real. They are simply out of sync. This is the true nature of causality in a delayed universe. It is asynchronous, and asynchronous systems behave in ways that feel unintuitive to human minds. In such systems, you cannot point to a single moment where responsibility begins or ends. Everything overlaps. Everything lags. Effects echo long after causes have vanished. Causes matter long after they are forgotten. This is why history feels alive. Wars end, but their consequences persist. Decisions are made, but their effects unfold across generations. The cause is not present. The effect is, but they are never together, which means the present moment is not where causality occurs. It is where causality becomes visible. By the time you feel an effect, the cause has already moved beyond reach. This explains something deeply human: why apologies often come too late, why forgiveness lags behind harm, why understanding trails pain. It is not moral failure. It is structural delay. We live downstream of our own actions, and yet we insist on imagining causality as immediate. We tell ourselves stories of instant karma, instant feedback, instant learning, but these stories do not match experience. Learning is slow. Integration is slower, meaning lags behind outcome. This lag creates suffering because the mind wants closure. It wants cause and effect to align neatly within the buffer, but the buffer is too small, too narrow to hold both at once. So one arrives without the other, and the mind fills the gap with judgment. This is where guilt lives, not in the action, not in the outcome, but in the delay between them. Guilt is what forms when understanding arrives after the moment to act has passed. It is the mind punishing itself for latency it cannot avoid. This realization does not absolve responsibility. It relocates it. Responsibility does not exist at the moment of action. It exists at the moment of integration. When understanding finally arrives, you are responsible for what you do with it, not for having it earlier. This is a subtle shift, but it changes everything. If consequences always arrive late, then wisdom is never available on time. It is only available afterward, which means living wisely does not mean making perfect decisions. It means learning how to receive delayed consequences without collapsing, to integrate them without self-destruction, to allow causality to finish its long arc through you, because causality does not end with effect, it continues. Effects become new causes, interpretations become actions, memories shape future behavior. The delay never disappears. It cascades. This cascading delay is why life feels complex, why nothing ever resolves cleanly, why endings are never truly endings. Every cause sets off waves that propagate far beyond the moment, and every effect arrives in pieces. Some you feel immediately, some years later, some never. This is not chaos. It is simply a system where information takes time. And now, the thought turns inward again. If causality is asynchronous, and if effects always arrive late, then when do you actually choose? At the moment of action, you do not yet know the effect. At the moment of understanding, you can no longer change the cause. Choice seems to vanish, but it hasn't. It has moved. Choice does not exist at the point where cause meets effect, because they never meet. Choice exists in how you respond to delayed effects, in how you integrate what arrives, in how you allow understanding to shape the next action. Free will does not act forward in time. It acts sideways, across the buffer, between reception and response. This is why growth is slow, not because change is difficult, but because causality must complete its loop before learning can occur. You cannot grow faster than consequences can arrive. You cannot mature faster than latency allows. This is why patience is not passive. It is an active accommodation of delay, a willingness to wait for effects to become visible, a willingness to to hold incomplete understanding without forcing resolution. This reframes suffering again. Pain is not proof of failure. It is proof that causality is still unfolding. Something has happened whose meaning has not yet fully arrived. The buffer is still holding it. And if you try to resolve it too quickly, you interrupt the process. You convert unfinished causality into fixed identity. This is how wounds become selves. But if you allow delay, if you allow understanding to arrive in its own time, then causality completes. And when causality completes, something loosens. The past does not change, but its grip does. Which brings us to an even stranger realization. If effects always arrive late, and if meaning emerges after the fact, then the universe is not punitive. It is indifferent. It does not reward or punish in real time. It simply unfolds. Judgment is something consciousness adds later. Karma is not a force. It is delayed interpretation. This does not make actions meaningless. It makes them temporarily dispersed. Everything matters, just not when you think it does. This perspective alters the emotional texture of life. Urgency softens, blame diffuse, compassion widens. Because if everyone is acting without full access to consequences, then everyone is, in some sense, innocent at the moment of action. Not innocent forever, but innocent in timing. And this understanding does not excuse harm. It explains why harm happens and why healing takes time. Because healing is not reversing cause and effect. It is allowing delayed meaning to finish arriving, which means healing cannot be rushed. It cannot be demanded. It cannot be scheduled. It can only be received. And that reception happens in the buffer, always in the buffer. This leads to a final turn in this chapter. If cause and effect are separated by delay, and if consciousness lives at the receiving end, then the present moment is not where causality is created. It is where causality is revealed. You are not shaping the universe in real time. You are witnessing what your past actions have set in motion and deciding quietly, slowly, how to let that witnessing change you. That decision is the only place where freedom lives. Not at the beginning of the chain, not at the end, but in the middle, in the delay. And once this is understood, another question naturally arises. If causality is always late, and if freedom lives in response rather than action, then what is the self? Is it the doer of causes, or the receiver of effects, or something else entirely? To answer that, we must step even deeper into the structure of identity itself, because identity, too, is not immediate. It is buffered, and that is where the next chapter quietly takes us. You do not experience yourself in real time. The person you believe you are, the one who thinks, decides, reacts, remembers, is always arriving a moment late. This feels impossible to accept because identity feels intimate, immediate, certain. You feel like you are here, now, doing things. But identity, like everything else in a delayed universe, is not something that happens. It is something that appears after processing, after interpretation, after meaning has settled enough to feel stable. The self is not an origin point. It is a result. Every sensation that feels personal first arrives as data. Every emotion begins as chemistry. Every thought emerges from electrical patterns you do not control. Only afterward does a story form. I felt this. It's right. I decided that. This is why. I am this kind of person. Oh, the story comes last, which means the self you identify with is not the author of experience. It is the narrator. And narrators speak after events have already unfolded. This is why identity feels continuous, even though experience is fragmented. Your mind stitches moments together and assigns them to a single character. That character feels persistent. But persistence is not proof of immediacy. It is proof of memory. Self exists because memory exists, and memory is always delayed. You do not remember events as they happen. You remember them as they are encoded. Encoding takes time, which means even your past is not stored in real time. It is stored after interpretation. You do not remember what happened. You remember what you understood. This is why memories change. Not because the past changes, but because understanding continues to arrive. Every time new information enters the buffer, old memories are re-rendered. You think you are revisiting the past. You are not. You are updating it. This is not a flaw. It is how identity stays coherent in a world that never stops unfolding. The self is not a fixed entity. It is a continuously refreshed model, a model built from delayed inputs. This model feels stable because it updates slowly. It cannot change instantly. If it did, you would feel lost. So the system resists rapid change. It prefers consistency over accuracy. This is why people cling to identities long after evidence suggests they should not. The buffer protects the self from too much update. It filters. It delays. It softens contradiction, which means something unsettling. The self you defend so strongly is not who you are in the present moment. It is who you were able to integrate. It is an echo, a compressed summary of what has already passed through the buffer. This is why self-reflection feels strange. You are never looking at yourself. You are looking at a model of yourself that is already outdated, and the act of looking updates it again. This recursive delay creates the illusion of depth. I am thinking about myself thinking. When you come stumble, but in truth, each layer is just another delayed render. There is no central self behind them, only layers of interpretation. This is not emptiness. It is multiplicity. The self is not one thing. It is a stack, and stacks update from the bottom up. Raw experience enters first. Meaning forms next. Identity labels last. By the time you say, "This is who I am," the experience that inspired it is gone. You are claiming ownership of something that no longer exists. And yet, this claim feels necessary. Without it, there would be no continuity, no accountability, no story. So the mind does something clever. It pretends that the self existed at the moment of action. It backdates identity. I did this because I am this kind of person, end quote. But this is a narrative convenience. At the moment of action, the identity was not fully formed. The information was incomplete. The buffer had not yet cleared, which means the self did not choose in full awareness. It acted within latency. This explains a quiet pain many people carry. I don't recognize the person I was back then. 7. Of course you don't. That person never existed in the way you imagine. They were a temporary configuration, operating with limited information. You are judging a past version of yourself with data that arrived later. This judgment feels personal, but it is misaligned in time. You are applying a future self to a past action, and that mismatch creates shame. But shame is not insight. It is temporal confusion. Once this is seen, something softens. You stop asking, "Why was I like that?" when 5 made, and begin asking, "What information did not exist yet?" Understand. This does not remove responsibility. It restores proportion. The self is not a fixed agent moving through time. It is a receiver, constantly updating its understanding of itself, which means identity is always provisional, always subject to revision, always incomplete. And this incompleteness is not a failure. It is what allows growth. A self that updated instantly would have no memory. A self that never updated would be trapped. So the buffer balances both. It slows change enough to preserve continuity, but allows change enough to permit evolution. Identity lives in that balance, not in the present moment, but in delayed integration. This is why profound experiences often take years to make sense. They arrive too large for the buffer. They sit unresolved. They echo, and slowly, meaning catches up. When it does, people say things like, "That's when I became who I am." End quote. But the becoming happened long before. What arrived later was recognition. It means the self you feel now is always behind the self you are becoming. You are never fully here. You are always arriving. This reframes identity as a process, not a possession. You do not have a self. You are receiving one, moment by moment, through delay. This perspective changes how conflict is understood. When two people clash, it is not two stable selves colliding. It is two delayed models interacting. Each person is responding, not to the other as they are, but to the last version of the other they have received. Arguments are never about the present. They are about misaligned updates. By the time a response arrives, the other person has already changed. So misunderstanding accumulates, not because of malice, but because of latency. The buffer holds outdated impressions, and those impressions act as if they are current. This is why communication is so fragile. Words arrive late. Meanings arrive later. Understanding arrives last. By the time clarity forms, the emotional moment has passed. This is not a flaw in language. It is a property of delayed systems, which means patience is not moral virtue. It is temporal skill, the ability to wait for identity to catch up before acting as if it is complete. This insight shifts something essential. If identity is always delayed, then the self you feel right now is not the one making the next choice. The next choice will be made by a self that has received more information, which means growth is inevitable. You cannot remain who you are. Reality will update you. The only question is how gently you allow that update to occur. Resistance does not stop change. It only congests the buffer. Acceptance does not erase identity. It allows it to refresh. This brings us to a quiet turning point. If the self is delayed, if identity is an echo, if choice happens after interpretation, then what exactly is awareness? Is it the self, or is it something else entirely? Because there is one thing that does not seem to be delayed in the same way. One thing that feels present even when everything else lags. And that is the feeling of being aware at all. Not who you are, but that you are. To understand this, we must separate awareness from identity. And that separation is where the next chapter gently opens. Awareness is not the self. This sounds simple, but it cuts against almost everything you have learned to believe. You have been taught to say, "I am aware," as if awareness belongs to identity, as if it is something the self possesses. But in a delayed universe, possession makes no sense, because identity arrives late and awareness does not. When you feel a sensation, before naming it, before interpreting it, before assigning it to me, there is a raw noticing. That noticing has no story, no character, no memory. It simply registers that something is happening. This registration feels immediate, in a way nothing else does. Thoughts lag, emotions lag, interpretations lag. But awareness itself does not seem to wait. It does not announce itself afterward. It does not arrive with explanation. It is simply there. This has confused philosophers and scientists for centuries, because everything else in experience shows signs of processing, yet awareness feels strangely untouched by delay. It does not feel buffered. It does not feel cued. It feels present. But this presence is misleading, not because it is false, but because it is not what you think it is. Awareness is not a thing moving through time. It is a condition that allows time to be experienced at all. It does not update. It receives updates. This distinction is subtle, but essential. Awareness does not need to catch up because it is not tracking content. It is the space in which content appears, and space does not lag behind what fills it. This is why awareness feels continuous, even as everything else changes. Thoughts come and go. Sensations rise and fade. Identity reshapes itself. Awareness remains. But remaining does not mean acting. Awareness does not choose. It does not decide. It does not intervene. It simply notices. This is where many misunderstandings arise. People assume that because awareness is present, it must be in control. But presence is not power. A screen is present for every frame of a movie. It does not direct the plot. Awareness is the screen. Identity is the movie, and the movie is delayed. Every scene you identify with has already been processed. Every emotion you claim as yours has already passed through layers of interpretation. Awareness does not generate these layers. It witnesses them, which means awareness is not downstream like consciousness. It is orthogonal. It does not sit at the end of the pipeline. It surrounds the pipeline. This explains something quietly liberating. You do not need to fix awareness. It is not broken. It does not suffer from latency. What suffers is identification. The moment awareness identifies with delayed content, it inherits the delay. I am anxious. It's bracketed. I am angry. Inside, I am behind. End quote. These statements bind awareness to buffered interpretations. But before identification, there is just noticing. Anxiety appears. Anger appears. Thought appears. Awareness remains unchanged. This is not detachment. It is accuracy. You are not the content of the buffer. You are the field in which the buffer operates. This insight does not remove pain. It repositions it. Pain still appears, but it no longer defines the observer. The observer was never delayed. Only the story was. This reframes the entire question of presence. Being present does not mean accessing the current state of the universe. That is impossible. Being present means recognizing awareness before it attaches to delayed narratives. Presence is not temporal alignment. It is perceptual clarity. And clarity does not depend on speed. It depends on separation. Separation between awareness and what it is aware of. This separation is often misunderstood as distance, but it is not distance. It is intimacy without ownership. You feel everything, but you are not reduced to what you feel. This is why moments of deep stillness feel timeless. Not because time stops, but because identification pauses. The buffer continues, updates continue, but awareness no longer grips the content. And when grip loosens, latency loses its emotional charge. You stop fighting delay. You stop trying to catch up. You stop demanding immediacy from a system that cannot provide it. This does not mean withdrawal from life. It means engagement without temporal confusion. You respond when responses arise. You act when action becomes clear, but you no longer demand that clarity appear before it can. You allow the buffer to do its work. This is the core of patience, not waiting for the future, waiting for understanding to arrive. And understanding always arrives late, which means suffering is often caused, not by events, but by demanding understanding before it is possible. Awareness does not make this demand. Identity does. Identity wants certainty now. Awareness accepts ambiguity until clarity forms. This difference explains why wisdom feels calm, not because the wise know more in advance, but because they do not confuse awareness with prediction. They do not force closure. They allow delay. This brings us to a subtle turning point. If awareness is not delayed, and if identity is, then freedom does not live in the self. It lives in awareness. Not freedom of choice, but freedom of relation. Freedom to relate to delayed content without being consumed by it. You cannot stop latency. You cannot reach the real-time universe. But you can stop mistaking buffered stories for immediate truth. This is where peace becomes possible, not because the world improves, but because your relationship to delay changes. You stop treating the buffer as reality. You treat it as what it is, a temporary holding space for information that has already happened. Awareness does not need to resolve it. It only needs to witness it. This witnessing is not passive. It subtly changes how content moves. When awareness does not cling, content clears faster. The buffer empties. The present lightens. This is why attention feels healing. Not because it fixes the past, but because it allows delayed meaning to complete its passage. Awareness does not interfere. It allows, and allowing is not weakness. It is alignment with how the universe actually works. A universe that does not deliver immediacy. A universe that unfolds ahead of you. A universe that you can never catch, only receive. This realization does not diminish life. It deepens it. Because if awareness is not delayed, then you are never truly late. You may receive information late, may understand late, you may decide late, but awareness itself is always exactly where it needs to be. Here, not in time, but in experience. And this prepares us for a crucial question. If awareness is undelayed, and if identity is delayed, and if choice emerges after interpretation, then what actually changes anything? What moves the system forward? If awareness does not act and identity arrives late, then how does transformation occur at all? To answer that, we must look at something even more elusive. Not awareness, not identity, but the subtle process by which delayed understanding reshapes future behavior. The slow, quiet mechanism by which the buffer teaches. That mechanism is learning. And learning, too, does not happen in real time. It accumulates, it drifts, it reshapes the future, long before you realize it has. That is where the next chapter begins to unfold. Learning does not happen when something occurs. It happens when meaning arrives. This distinction is easy to overlook because we are taught to associate learning with events, a lesson, a mistake, an experience. But events themselves do not teach. They only trigger the conditions for teaching. What teaches is integration, and integration is slow. When something happens, the system reacts, the body responds, the mind scrambles, attention narrows. There is no space for learning in that moment. The buffer is full. Signals arrive too quickly. Interpretations cue. Prediction overwhelms reflection. Only later, sometimes much later, does understanding begin to form. Learning does not occur at the point of impact. It occurs after the impact has settled enough to be examined. This is why insight often arrives in silence, in rest, in distance. You learn not when life is loud, but when it becomes quiet enough for meaning to surface. This delay is not accidental. A system cannot learn while it is defending itself. Learning requires stability, and stability only returns after the buffer clears. This is why repeated experiences are often required. The first time something happens, the buffer floods. The second time, less so. The third time, patterns emerge. By the fourth or fifth time, meaning begins to stabilize. This is not because repetition teaches. It is because repetition reduces surprise. And surprise is the enemy of learning. Surprise consumes bandwidth. When the system is no longer overwhelmed, it can finally notice structure. That noticing is learning. This explains why wisdom often appears late in life. Not because intelligence increases, but because fewer things overwhelm the buffer. The system has seen enough patterns to remain stable in the face of new input. Meaning arrives faster. Integration accelerates, but never instantly. Learning always lags. which means something quietly important. You cannot force learning to happen in real time. No amount of willpower can compress the delay. You can study, you can practice, you can expose yourself to experience, but integration happens on its own schedule. The buffer must empty at its own pace. This is why impatience with oneself is so damaging. It treats learning as if it were a choice. But learning is not chosen, it is allowed. The moment you demand that understanding appear before it is ready, you congest the buffer again. Pressure slows learning, gentleness speeds it. This inversion feels counterintuitive in a culture that rewards urgency. But urgency belongs to action, not integration. You can act quickly, but you cannot understand quickly. Understanding emerges only when conditions allow, which leads to a deeper realization. Learning is not the accumulation of information. It is the reorganization of interpretation. You can receive vast amounts of data and learn nothing, because learning is not about what enters the buffer. It is about what remains after the buffer clears. Most information passes through unnoticed. It does not integrate. It does not change behavior. It does not alter identity. Learning occurs only when delayed meaning reshapes future response. This is why learning is invisible when it happens. You do not feel yourself learning. You feel confusion. You feel frustration. You feel nothing at all. Then one day, without warning, you respond differently. The behavior has changed. Afterward, you say, "I learned." Maya says, but the learning happened earlier, quietly, below awareness. In the buffer, this suggests something subtle. Learning is not a moment. It is a drift, a gradual shift in how delayed information is processed, which means learning cannot be pinned to a specific experience. It spreads across many. This reframes failure. Failure does not mean learning did not occur. It may mean learning is incomplete. The buffer is still holding unresolved meaning, and unresolved meaning needs time. This is why people repeat mistakes they know better than to make. Knowing is not learning. Knowing is information. Learning is integration. Information arrives fast. Integration arrives late, which means self-judgment often targets the wrong thing. You criticize yourself for repeating patterns, but repetition is often part of the learning curve. The system is still collecting enough data to reorganize itself. Punishment does not speed this up. It slows it, because punishment floods the buffer again. Fear compresses attention. Compression reduces integration. Learning requires space. This is why safe environments accelerate growth, not because they remove challenge, but because they reduce unnecessary threat. Threat overwhelms the buffer. Safety clears it. This applies not only to individuals, but to entire cultures. Societies do not learn from trauma immediately. They react, they defend, they repeat. Only generations later does meaning integrate. History is buffered. Revolutions occur. Lessons arrive decades later. Wars end. Understanding arrives long after the last shot. We like to believe we learn quickly, but collective learning is slow, because collective buffers are vast. Information must pass through many layers of identity, power, narrative. Integration takes time. This explains why history repeats. Not because people forget, but because learning has not completed its cycle. The buffer has not cleared. This does not make learning hopeless. It makes it patient. Learning is inevitable in a delayed system. Given enough time, patterns integrate. Given enough exposure, behavior changes. But not on demand, which brings us back to the individual. If learning lags, and identity lags, and awareness simply observes, then what changes your future behavior? The answer is not insight. Insight is a symptom. The answer is accumulation. Small exposures, repeated signals, gradual integration. Learning is not dramatic. It does not announce itself. It quietly alters thresholds. What once triggered panic no longer does. What once felt urgent now feels neutral. What once confused now feels obvious. These shifts are subtle. You often notice them only in hindsight. I used to react differently. In quote, I don't know when that changed. It is crease. That is learning. It happened in the background while you were busy living, which suggests something quietly reassuring. You do not need to constantly monitor your progress. Progress does not require supervision. It requires exposure and patience. The buffer does the rest. This reframes effort. Effort is not forcing understanding. Effort is staying present long enough for understanding to arrive. Effort is continuing to engage, even when clarity is absent. This is why persistence matters. Not because it guarantees success, but because it gives learning time. Time is the true teacher. Not time as a passing of moments, but time as the accumulation of delayed integration. This is why sudden transformations are rare. They require massive buffer clearance at once. Sometimes it happens during shock, loss, revelation, but even then, integration continues long afterward. The moment changes direction. The learning takes years, which means most of what shapes you does not happen when you think it does. It happens later, quietly, while you are focused on something else. This insight alters how growth is approached. Instead of asking, what should I understand right now? End quote. You ask, what am I repeatedly exposed to? It may come because exposure shapes the buffer. What you repeatedly allow to enter determines what eventually integrates. This is why environments matter more than intentions. Intentions act in the moment. Environments act over time. The buffer integrates what it receives most often. It does not mean you are powerless. It means your power is indirect. You influence learning by choosing what surrounds you, not by demanding immediate change. This indirect power is slower, but far more reliable. Which brings us to a subtle pivot. If learning reshapes future behavior without conscious command, and if awareness only witnesses the process, then control is not what we thought it was. You do not control yourself in real time. You cultivate conditions. You shape inputs. You trust the delay. This understanding removes a heavy burden. You no longer need to micromanage your becoming. Becoming happens anyway. Reality updates you. Meaning catches up. Learning integrates. Your role is not to rush it. Your role is to allow it. And allowance is not passivity. It is cooperation with latency. This cooperation changes how mistakes are viewed. Mistakes are not proof of failure. They are part of the data set. They feed the buffer. They contribute to integration. Only when meaning arrives do they become lessons. And lessons are never instant. This leads to a final realization in this chapter. If learning is delayed, and if growth happens quietly, and if awareness simply observes, then you are not behind in life. You are exactly where learning places you. You may not see the change yet, but the buffer is working. Something is integrating. Something is shifting. And the future you will live is already being shaped by meanings that have not arrived yet. This understanding softens the demand for certainty. You no longer need to know who you are becoming. You only need to remain open, long enough for learning to complete its arc. Which raises the next question. If learning reshapes future behavior without conscious choice, and if identity updates after the fact, then what happens to intention? Does intention matter at all in a delayed universe? Or is it just another story that arrives late? To answer that, we must examine intention itself, not as a decision, but as a signal that enters the system and propagates forward through time. That is where the next chapter quietly draws us. Intention does not act forward. It propagates. We are taught to think of intention as a moment of choice, a clear decision made in the present, aimed at shaping the future. But in a delayed universe, nothing works that cleanly. When you form an intention, nothing happens immediately. No switch flips in reality. No future rearranges itself. What happens instead is quieter. A signal enters the system. That signal does not leap ahead of time. It does not override latency. It joins the same pipeline as everything else. Intention is not an order. It is an input. And like all inputs, it must travel. When you decide to change, the decision does not instantly transform behavior. It becomes information. That information spreads through memory, habit, environment, and repetition. It encounters resistance. It gets diluted. It gets reinforced. Only later, often much later, does behavior begin to shift. This is why intention so often feels ineffective. You say, "I decided to be different," end quote, and then you aren't. Not because intention is weak, but because it is slow. Intention is subject to delay. It does not escape the buffer. It enters it. This reframes a familiar frustration. People believe they lack discipline, motivation, or willpower, but what they often lack is patience with propagation. They expect intention to act like a command. In reality, it behaves like a signal sent across a noisy channel. Some signals fade, some distort, some amplify. Which ones persist depends not on force, but on context. This is why the same intention can succeed in one environment and fail completely in another. The intention did not change. The channel did. Signals propagate differently depending on the medium. In a hostile environment, intention weakens. In a supportive environment, it strengthens. This is not psychology. It is systems behavior. Every delayed system responds not to isolated inputs, but to sustained patterns, which means intention alone is never enough. It must be repeated, not because repetition convinces reality, but because repetition compensates for delay. Each repetition reinforces the signal, allowing it to survive long enough to influence future states. This is why habits form, not because the mind decides, but because signals recur. A single intention rarely changes anything. A repeated intention slowly reshapes thresholds. You do not suddenly become patient. You encounter patience often enough that your buffer integrates it. And when integration completes, behavior changes without effort. Only then do you say, "My intention worked," is today, but the work was done by delay. This understanding changes how failure is interpreted. When an intention does not produce immediate change, it is not ignored. It is cued. The buffer holds it alongside other signals. Some signals reinforce it. Others compete. The system weighs them over time. What emerges is not the strongest intention, but the most consistent. This is why identity changes feel sudden in hindsight. For years, nothing seems to happen. Then suddenly, behavior shifts. The shift was not sudden. The buffer simply reached a tipping point. Enough signals accumulated. The model updated. This delay is not inefficiency. It is protection. A system that changed instantly with every intention would be unstable. It would oscillate. It would fragment. Delay smooths change. It ensures that only intentions supported by reality become structure. This reframes self-control. Self-control is not forcing yourself to act against latency. It is aligning intention with conditions, so propagation can occur. You cannot will a future into existence, but you can seed it. Seeds do not grow on command. They require time, repetition, and environment. Intention is a seed, which brings us to a deeper twist. If intention propagates forward slowly, then most of what shapes your future is not what you intend once, It is what you allow repeatedly. The system does not care what you promise yourself. It cares what signals keep arriving. This explains a painful truth. People often intend one thing and live another, not because they are dishonest, but because their environment sends stronger signals than their intentions. The buffer integrates what it receives most consistently. This is not a moral judgment. It is a structural one. Change the signals, and the future changes. Not instantly, but inevitably. This is where responsibility quietly reappears. Not as blame, but as stewardship. You are not responsible for immediate outcomes. Latency prevents that, but you are responsible for what you repeatedly feed the system. This is where freedom lives in a delayed universe. Not in choosing outcomes, but in choosing inputs. You cannot choose who you are tomorrow, but you can choose what enters the buffer today. This choice feels small, almost insignificant. A conversation, a habit, a piece of attention. But small inputs accumulate. They propagate. They reshape future states. This is why intention must be humble. It must accept delay. It must release control over timing. The moment intention demands immediacy, it collapses into frustration. But when intention accepts latency, it becomes powerful. It becomes patient. This patience is not resignation. It is alignment with reality's update rate. And this alignment changes how goals are approached. Goals are not destinations. They are directions. A direction does not need to be reached immediately. To be effective, it only needs to be maintained long enough to influence trajectory. This is why giving up often feels sudden. The intention did not fail. It simply stopped being reinforced. Propagation ceased. The system stabilized elsewhere. And this is why recommitting feels difficult. The signal must be reintroduced. The buffer must be influenced again. Nothing is lost, but delay must be honored again. This perspective softens another common pain. People blame themselves for not changing faster. But faster change would be unstable change. You do not want instant transformation. You want integrated transformation. Integrated change does not reverse easily. It survives stress. It persists under noise. Delay is what makes it durable, which leads to a quiet inversion. Latency is not what blocks intention. Latency is what makes intention matter. Without delay, intention would be overwritten by the next impulse. With delay, intention has time to shape structure. This also explains why sudden emotional decisions often do not last. Spike the buffer, but they do not sustain signal. Only calm, repeated intention integrates. This reframes discipline. Discipline is not force applied in the moment. It is consistency applied over time. And consistency is simply intention that respects delay. Which brings us to an even subtler insight. If intention propagates forward, then much of your future is already influenced by intentions you barely noticed forming. Subtle preferences, quiet aversions, repeated thoughts, not dramatic vows. Small signals accumulate invisibly. This is why self-awareness matters. Not to judge intentions, but to notice which ones are being repeated. Awareness does not control intention, but it can illuminate it. And illumination changes what gets reinforced. This is the gentle power of attention. Attention is not force. It is selection. What you attend to enters the buffer more often. What enters more often integrates faster. This is why attention feels creative, not because it makes things happen, but because it shapes propagation. In a delayed universe, attention is the closest thing to influence. It does not override causality. It feeds it. This perspective changes how effort feels. Effort is no longer about pushing the future. It is about tending the present inputs. You stop asking, "Why hasn't this worked yet?" Is best did Mike, and start asking, What signals am I reinforcing? It's demand. This question does not demand urgency. It invites honesty. Which signals align with the future you imagine? Which ones contradict it? You cannot answer this once. You answer it continuously, because propagation never stops. Signals are always moving. The future is always being shaped, just not in real time. And this leads us to a crucial transition. If intention propagates, and if learning integrates, and if identity updates after the fact, then the future you will live is not waiting ahead of you. It is already being assembled from delayed signals, some of which you recognize, some of which you do not. The future is not empty. It is buffered, filled with meanings that have not yet arrived, which means the question is no longer, what will happen? Infracted, it is, what is already in motion, end quote. To explore that, we must widen the frame, because individual buffers do not exist alone. They overlap, they interact, they synchronize imperfectly. And when many buffers interact, something larger emerges. Collective reality, shared timelines, history itself. And history, too, is delayed. That is where the next chapter quietly begins to unfold. Societies do not live in the present. They live in delay. Just as individuals receive reality late, entire cultures experience events long after they have already happened. History does not unfold in real time. It arrives in waves. An event occurs. Then information spreads unevenly. Then interpretations compete. Then meaning settles, sometimes decades later. Only then does a society say, "Now we understand what happened," end quote. But by then, the world has already changed again. This is why history feels alive long after events end. Wars conclude on paper, yet their consequences echo for generations. Technologies emerge suddenly, yet societies take years to absorb what they have done. Revolutions erupt in moments, yet their meanings are argued over for centuries. History is not a record of events. It is a delayed integration of them. Just like personal learning, collective learning happens only when the buffer clears, but collective buffers are vast. They contain millions of perspectives, conflicting identities, competing narratives. Information enters unevenly. Some groups receive it early, others late. Some never at all. So society does what every delayed system does. It fragments. Different versions of reality coexist. Different interpretations harden into belief. And because each group believes it is responding to the present, conflict feels immediate and justified. But what they are really responding to are different stages of delay. One group reacts to raw events. Another reacts to early interpretations. Another reacts to inherited meaning. They are not arguing about the same moment. They are arguing across time. This explains why consensus is so rare, not because truth is elusive, but because arrival times differ. Reality reaches different minds at different speeds. Media accelerates some signals, slows others, amplifies a few. But acceleration does not remove delay. It redistributes it. Some people live closer to the front edge of information. Others live far downstream. Neither position guarantees understanding. Early information is often incomplete. Late information is often distorted. Meaning still arrives last. This is why collective fear spreads so easily. Fear does not require understanding. It only requires signal. And signals travel faster than integration. Panic moves faster than wisdom. Always has. This is not a flaw in society. It is a property of delayed systems. Understanding requires quiet. Fear thrives in noise. And societies are rarely quiet. Which means collective understanding is slow, much slower than individuals expect. This leads to a painful realization. By the time a society understands the consequences of an action, it has often already repeated it. History does not repeat because people forget. History repeats because learning has not completed its cycle. The buffer is still full. This is why apologies from institutions feel hollow. By the time regret arrives, the harm is already embedded. And by the time healing begins, new harms have started. This is not cynicism. It is timing. Collective morality lags behind collective action. Always. This does not mean progress is impossible. It means progress is delayed. Societies do learn, but they learn slowly, and they learn unevenly. Some lessons integrate fully, others only partially. Some remain unresolved for centuries. An unresolved meaning does not disappear. It calcifies. It becomes ideology. Ideology is frozen delay. It is meaning that never completed integration. It persists because the buffer never cleared. This is why ideologies feel absolute. They stop learning. They no longer update. They treat delayed interpretation as timeless truth, which creates rigidity. And rigidity resists reality. But reality continues updating. The gap widens. Tension builds. Eventually, rupture occurs. Revolutions are not new ideas. They are delayed integrations finally breaking through. When enough unresolved meaning accumulates, the buffer cannot hold it. Release becomes inevitable. This pattern repeats across history, not because humans are irrational, but because delay is structural. Understanding cannot outrun latency. This perspective reframes responsibility again. Individuals often blame themselves for not fixing society, but individuals do not control collective buffers. No one does. Collective understanding emerges from interaction, not intention. This does not absolve responsibility. It relocates it. Responsibility does not lie in immediate correction. It lies in contribution to long-term integration. The signals you reinforce matter. The narratives you repeat matter. But their effects will not be immediate. They propagate slowly. This is why despair often arises. People demand change in real time, but real time does not exist at scale. Societies cannot update instantly. They must process, and processing takes generations. This does not mean action is meaningless. It means action is upstream. You may never live to see its integration, but it enters the buffer, and buffers remember. This idea softens another pain, the feeling that nothing you do matters. In delayed systems, impact is rarely visible where it originates. It travels, it mutates, it integrates later. You may plant a signal that does not bloom until long after you are gone. This is not tragedy, it is continuity. History is not a sequence of moments. It is a long integration curve, which means judging the present moment as success or failure is always premature. The buffer is still working. This applies not only to politics or culture, but to collective identity itself. Societies, like individuals, construct a sense of who we are. C10.6, that identity is also delayed. Nations define themselves. Based on selective memory, they narrate themselves into existence. But these narratives lag behind reality. They describe who the society was able to integrate, not who it is becoming. This creates tension. Reality updates faster than identity. When the gap grows too large, conflict emerges. Feel that something is wrong, but cannot articulate it. They are living in an outdated self-image. This is not unique to any era. It is the default condition of collective life. Understanding this does not solve conflict. It contextualizes it. Conflict is not always about disagreement. It is often about misaligned delays. Different groups are responding to different versions of reality. Until these versions converge, resolution remains elusive. This is why dialogue is so difficult. Not because people are unwilling, but because they are not synchronized. They are not receiving the same frames. One person speaks from an earlier update. another from a later one. Each feels misunderstood. Both are correct. And yet, convergence does occur. Over time, slowly, painfully, as shared experiences accumulate, as narratives adjust, as buffers clear. This is learning at scale. It is inefficient. It is slow. It is unavoidable. Which brings us back to latency again. Delay is not a bug in history. It is the mechanism by which history exists. Without delay, there would be no memory. Without memory, there would be no identity. Without identity, there would be no society. Delay creates continuity, but continuity comes at a cost. It ensures that understanding always trails action. This is why humility is essential. Not moral humility, but temporal humility. The recognition that no generation fully understands the consequences of its actions. The recognition that certainty is always provisional. This humility does not paralyze action. It softens judgment. It invites patience. It reminds us that meaning is still forming, and this realization leads to a quieter shift. If societies live in delay, and if history integrates slowly, then many of today's conflicts are not failures. They are symptoms of incomplete processing. Something has happened whose meaning has not yet arrived. The buffer is congested. Noise increases. Fear amplifies. But this is not the end of the story. It is the middle. And middles are always uncomfortable. This perspective changes how hope is understood. Hope is not optimism. It is trust in integration. The trust that meaning will arrive. If signals are allowed to propagate, this does not guarantee outcomes. It guarantees movement. History does not stand still. It never has. It updates, and societies slowly catch up, which brings us to a more intimate realization. If collective reality is delayed, and if individual reality is delayed, then much of what feels overwhelming today is not happening now. It is arriving now. The weight you feel may belong to a past that has finally reached you. And if that is true, then relief does not come from changing the world instantly. It comes from understanding what you are actually holding, because holding delayed meaning is different from being in danger. This insight prepares us for the next layer. If fear spreads faster than understanding, if panic outruns integration, then anxiety itself may be a symptom of latency, not of threat. And if anxiety is tied to delay, then calming the system may require something very different than control. To explore that, we must turn our attention inward again, away from societies, back toward the individual nervous system, because the body, too, lives inside delay, and the body has its own way of responding to buffered reality. That is where the next chapter quietly begins to draw us. Anxiety is not a signal from the future. It is a delayed echo from the past. This feels wrong at first, because anxiety always points forward. It whispers about what might happen, what could go wrong, what needs to be prevented. But anxiety does not originate in possibility. It originates in latency. The body does not predict the future. It reacts to unresolved information. When something happens, a shock, a loss, a threat, a sudden change, the nervous system responds immediately. Heart rate rises, muscles tense, attention narrows. This response is ancient. It evolved to protect, but understanding does not arrive with that response, meaning lags behind sensation. The body reacts first. The mind explains later. If explanation never fully arrives, the body does not stand down. It remains on alert. This sustained alertness is what we call anxiety. Fear of what is coming, but vigilance for what has not yet been integrated. The body is holding information that the mind has not finished processing. This is why anxiety often feels vague. There is no clear object, no specific danger, just a sense that something is wrong, but wrong here does not mean unsafe. It means incomplete. The buffer is still full. The nervous system does not care about stories. It cares about resolution. Until resolution arrives, it assumes the threat is ongoing. This is not pathology. It is logic. In a delayed system, absence of clarity is indistinguishable from danger, so the body stays ready. This explains why reassurance rarely works. You tell yourself, "It's fine, nothing bad is happening." They saddened of this sode. But the body does not respond to language. It responds to integration. Words arrive late. Signals arrived earlier. Until those signals complete their cycle, anxiety persists. This also explains why anxiety spikes after events end, after accidents, after arguments, after major life changes. During the event, the buffer is flooded. There is no room for anxiety. Afterward, when things quiet down, the unresolved information begins to surface. The body finally has space to notice what it could not process at the time. Anxiety is delayed awareness. This reframes something deeply personal. You are not anxious because you are weak. You are anxious because your system is honest. It refuses to declare safety until understanding has actually arrived, which means anxiety is not an enemy. It is a messenger, but not from the future, from the past that has not yet finished speaking. This does not mean anxiety should be indulged. It means it should be listened to differently. Anxiety does not need to be argued with. It needs to be integrated. Integration is slow. You cannot force it. You cannot reason it away. You must allow the buffer to clear. This is why anxiety eases during sleep. Not because problems vanish, but because the system finally processes. Dreams are not random. They are integration. The brain replays, reorganizes, and redistributes information. It empties the buffer. When sleep is disrupted, integration is disrupted. Anxiety accumulates. This is not psychological. It is physiological. Delayed systems require downtime. Without it, latency compounds, which leads to an unsettling realization. Modern life reduces integration time. Constant stimulation, endless updates, perpetual urgency. The buffer never empties. Anxiety becomes chronic, not because threats increase, but because resolution never completes. The body is living in a permanent holding pattern. This is why calm feels unfamiliar. Not because it is unnatural, but because the system has forgotten what an empty buffer feels like. And yet, anxiety is not purely individual. It is contagious. Just as fear spreads faster than understanding in societies, anxiety spreads faster than resolution in bodies. One person's unresolved tension is sensed by another. Posture, tone, timing, signals propagate. Buffers synchronize imperfectly. This is why anxious environments feel heavy, not because danger is present, but because unresolved meaning saturates the space. This insight changes how anxiety should be approached. The goal is not to eliminate it. The goal is to finish processing. This does not happen through control. Control adds pressure. Pressure adds signals. Signals congest the buffer. Resolution requires the opposite: stillness, repetition, safety. The body needs evidence that the threat has ended, not words. Evidence, regular routines, predictable rhythms, gentle exposure without overwhelm. These do not cure anxiety. They allow integration. This also explains why sudden relief can feel frightening. When anxiety drops quickly, the body does not trust it. It assumes something is missing. Calm feels like vulnerability, because the system has learned that alertness equals survival. This is not irrational. It is learned latency, which means healing anxiety is not teaching the body to relax. It is teaching the body to trust completion. Completion arrives only after repeated evidence. and evidence arrives slowly. This is why healing is uneven. Good days, bad days. Integration is not linear. Some information clears, other information resurfaces. The buffer empties in layers. This process cannot be rushed. Trying to rush it creates new, unresolved signals, which leads to a crucial twist. If anxiety is delayed processing, then many fears are already obsolete. They refer to conditions that no longer exist, but the body does not know this yet. It is still receiving. This does not make anxiety foolish. It makes it temporally misaligned. You are feeling yesterday's alarm today, and you may feel today's alarm tomorrow. This is how delay works. Understanding this reduces self-blame. You are not failing to be calm. Your system is finishing a task, which means the most effective response to anxiety is not resistance. It is cooperation. You give the system time. You give it repetition. You give it environments that signal safety consistently, not once, over and over. This is not patience as virtue. It is patience as engineering. Delayed systems stabilize gradually, which brings us to an even deeper layer. If anxiety is a symptom of unresolved information, then peace is not the absence of threat. It is the presence of integration. Peace is not something you create. It is something that arrives. When the buffer clears, this reframes the search for calm. You stop asking, "How do I stop feeling anxious?" It's not say, and start asking, "What has not finished processing?" End quote. This question does not demand an answer immediately. It invites curiosity. Curiosity slows the system. Slowing the system allows integration, which is why curiosity feels calming. It does not threaten. It does not rush. It allows space. Space is what the buffer needs. This insight also changes how we think about trauma. Trauma is not the event. It is the information that never finished integrating. Traumatic memories feel present, not because they are happening again, but because they never fully arrived. They remain stuck in transit. The body continues to wait. This waiting feels like danger, but it is actually incompletion. Healing trauma does not erase the past. It allows it to arrive fully, so it can finally leave. This arrival is often uncomfortable, which is why healing can feel worse before it feels better. More information enters awareness. The buffer temporarily fills. Then, slowly, it empties. Anxiety spikes, then fades. This pattern is not failure. It is movement. And movement is what integration looks like from the inside. This understanding transforms how time is perceived during anxiety. You stop measuring progress by how you feel in the moment. You measure it by capacity. Can you hold the sensation without collapse? Can you remain present without urgency? These capacities indicate integration is underway, not completion, but progress. This perspective removes the fantasy of instant peace. Peace is not an event. It is a condition that emerges when latency resolves, which means peace cannot be pursued directly. It must be allowed. And allowance requires trust. Trust that the system knows how to process, if given the right conditions. This trust is not blind optimism. It is alignment with reality. Delayed systems do not respond to force. They respond to stability. And stability is built slowly, which brings us to a subtle transition. If anxiety is delayed fear, and if peace is integrated meaning, then what about desire? What about longing? What about the pull toward things not yet present? Is desire a signal from the future? Or is it too a form of latency? To answer that, we must look at one of the most powerful forces in human life. Not fear, not learning, but attraction, the way the future seems to call us. The way possibility feels real before it arrives. That pull, too, lives inside delay. And understanding it will reshape how hope itself is understood. That is where the next chapter quietly begins to open. Desire does not come from the future. It comes from unfinished integration. This feels counterintuitive because desire always points forward, toward something not yet here, toward a life not yet lived, toward a version of yourself not yet formed. Desire feels like a pull from ahead, but nothing pulls information backward through time. The universe does not send signals from what has not happened. So if desire is not arriving from the future, where does it come from? It comes from absence. Not the absence of objects, but the absence of resolution. Desire forms when the system senses something incomplete, a pattern that has not finished integrating. Signal that entered the buffer but did not resolve. The mind labels this incompletion as want. It's inscrited. But wanting is not lack, it is momentum. When something meaningful enters the system and cannot yet be realized, it does not disappear. It remains active. It continues to propagate internally. That propagation is felt as desire. This is why desire can feel urgent. Even when nothing external is happening, nothing is missing in the world. Something is unfinished inside the buffer. This reframes longing. You are not pulled toward what you do not have. You are carried forward by what has not finished arriving. Desire is delayed, meaning moving forward. This explains why desire often intensifies. When obstacles appear, resistance does not weaken desire. It sharpens it. Because resistance prevents resolution. The signal remains active. It loops. The buffer keeps it alive. This is why forbidden desires feel powerful, why postponed dreams feel heavier, why suppressed emotions do not fade. They do not fade because they have not integrated. The system does not know what to do with them yet, so it keeps them close. Desire is not irrational. It is persistence. A system refusing to discard information that has not been understood. This also explains why fulfilled desires often feel underwhelming. When a desire resolves, the signal stops propagating. The buffer clears, the intensity disappears, and the mind interprets this as disappointment. I thought it would feel different. But what disappeared was not pleasure. It was momentum. The system returned to baseline. Desire feels alive not because it promises happiness, but because it carries unresolved energy. Resolution feels calm. Calm can feel empty. If you were expecting excitement, this does not mean desire was wrong. It means desire was a process, not a destination. This perspective dissolves a common confusion. People chase desire believing it contains fulfillment. But fulfillment is what happens after desire dissolves. Desire is movement. Fulfillment is stillness. They cannot coexist, which is why the satisfaction of achieving something is often quieter than expected. The mind had prepared for arrival, but arrival ends the signal. Silence replaces motion. This silence is often misinterpreted as loss, so the system searches for a new desire, not because fulfillment failed, but because momentum ended. This cycle creates the illusion that desire itself is the source of meaning, but desire is only the carrier. Meaning arrives when desire completes its integration. This completion rarely happens instantly. Often, the external achievement is not enough. The system needs time to adjust, to reorganize identity, to absorb the new reality. Until that happens, desire may linger, even after its object is obtained. This is why people achieve goals and still feel restless. The external event resolved. The internal integration did not. Desire remains because meaning has not arrived yet. This is not ingratitude. It is latency. The buffer is still processing the change, and until it completes, desire continues to signal forward. This understanding changes how longing is treated. Instead of asking, "What do I want?" it's double. You ask, what has not finished integrating. 10. This question shifts attention from chasing outcomes to noticing internal processes. Often, desire points not to an object, but to a transformation, not a thing, but a state, a way of being that has not yet stabilized. This is why desire often shifts once acted upon. You thought you wanted one thing, but once you move toward it, something else emerges. The original desire was only a proxy, a temporary symbol, for a deeper integration process. This is also why desire can feel confusing. The system does not know the final form of resolution yet. It only knows that something is incomplete. So it generates movement. Movement creates exposure. Exposure creates data. Data eventually leads to understanding. Desire is how the system explores its own incompletion. This perspective removes shame from desire. Desire is not greed. It is not weakness. It is the system attempting to finish something, which means suppressing desire does not resolve it. Suppression blocks integration. The signal remains active, but hidden. Hidden signals do not fade. They distort. They emerge indirectly as frustration, resentment, anxiety. As the buffer is still holding unresolved energy, integration requires engagement, not indulgence, but contact. You allow the desire to be known. You examine what it is actually pointing toward. Often, what emerges is not craving, but information. Desire contains data about what matters to the system. Ignoring it is like ignoring a warning light because you dislike the color. This does not mean every desire must be acted upon. Action is not the same as integration. Some desires resolve through understanding alone. Once the system recognizes what the desire was really about, the signal dissolves. Other desires require external movement. Experience is needed. The system must test reality. Either way, resolution requires honesty. And honesty takes time, which brings us to a subtle shift. If desire is delayed, meaning moving forward, then hope is not belief in the future. Hope is trust in integration. Hope is the confidence that unfinished processes will complete, not necessarily in the way you expect, but in a way that brings coherence. This makes hope quieter than optimism. Optimism imagines outcomes. Hope allows resolution. Optimism demands the future align with expectation. Hope accepts that understanding will arrive eventually. This is why hope can exist, even in uncertainty. Not because outcomes are guaranteed, but because meaning is still forming. This reframes despair. Despair is not the absence of possibility. It is the belief that integration has stopped, that nothing new will arrive. But as long as desire exists, integration is still active. The system is still moving, even if movement feels painful. Which leads to another realization. Desire does not need to be satisfied to complete. It needs to be understood. Understanding is the true endpoint. Once understanding arrives, the signal quiets. This is why insight can dissolve longing instantly. Not because circumstances changed, but because the buffer cleared. The system recognized what it was actually seeking. This does not mean understanding is always easy. Some desires are layered. They contain multiple unresolved meanings. They require repeated exposure before integration completes. This is why patterns repeat in relationships, in careers, in habits. The system is testing variations to extract meaning. Once meaning arrives, the pattern dissolves. This is learning again, but applied to attraction rather than fear. Fear holds information about danger. Desire holds information about growth. Both are signals in a delayed system. Both persist until integrated. This symmetry changes how life feels. You stop seeing fear and desire as opposing forces. They are both messengers. Fear warns of unresolved threat. Desire signals unresolved potential. Both belong to the buffer. Both are delayed. Both require patience, which means the art of living in a delayed universe is not eliminating desire or fear. It is learning how to listen to them without being ruled by them. You allow them to inform, not dominate. This requires a different relationship to time. You stop expecting immediate clarity. You accept that some things must unfold before they can be understood. This acceptance reduces urgency. Urgency is what turns desire into compulsion. When you believe resolution must happen now, you force action. Forced action often creates more unresolved information. The buffer fills again. Delay compounds. But when you allow time, desire softens. It becomes directional rather than demanding. This directional quality is important. Desire does not tell you what to obtain. It tells you where energy wants to move. Movement does not guarantee arrival, but it guarantees learning. And learning guarantees integration. This returns us to freedom again. Freedom is not choosing outcomes. Freedom is choosing how to relate to unresolved signals. You can cling to them, you can suppress them, or you can explore them. Exploration is the middle path. It respects desire without obeying it blindly. It allows fear without being paralyzed. It works with delay. This is a subtle skill. It cannot be mastered quickly, because mastery itself is delayed. Understanding arrives only after experience. This insight prepares us for a deeper transition. If fear is delayed threat and desire is delayed potential, then both are movements within the same system. They are not opposing forces. Signals flowing through latency. And if that is true, then the question becomes, what happens when neither fear nor desire dominates? What remains when the buffer is clear and signals have integrated? What is experienced when nothing is unresolved? That state is often described with many names: peace, stillness, presence. But in a delayed universe, it is something more precise. It is alignment. Alignment between awareness and integration. No congestion, no backlog, just flow. Understanding this state, not as an ideal, but as a condition, will change how everything we have discussed comes together. Because it reveals what the delayed universe is moving toward, not as a goal, but as a tendency. That is where the next chapter quietly begins to open. Alignment is not a state you reach. It is what remains when nothing is waiting. When fear has finished warning and desire has finished pulling, there is a quiet interval. Nothing demands attention. Nothing pushes forward. Nothing resists. This interval is often mistaken for emptiness, but it is not empty. It is synchronized. In a delayed universe, alignment does not mean being in the present. The present, as we have seen, is always late. Alignment means something else. It means the buffer is clear. Information has arrived. Meaning has integrated. Signals have completed their arcs. Nothing is congested. Experience flows without friction. This is why alignment feels calm. Not because nothing is happening, but because nothing is stuck. Events still occur. Information still propagates. Reality still updates ahead of you. But your system is not holding unresolved meaning. You are not behind yourself. This is the closest experience gets to what people call flow, indication. But flow is not speed. It is coherence. The nervous system, the mind, and awareness are no longer pulling in different temporal directions. Reaction is appropriate. Understanding is sufficient. Identity is flexible. There is no urgency to correct, because nothing feels incomplete. This state cannot be forced. Forcing creates signal. Signal fills the buffer. Alignment only appears when there is nothing left to process. This is why attempts to stay present often fail. Presence is not a technique. It is a consequence. A system with unresolved information cannot be present. It must process first. This reframes meditation, reflection, and rest. They do not create alignment. They remove interference. They reduce new input so integration can finish. Alignment is what emerges afterward. This is also why alignment cannot be permanent. Life continuously introduces new signals. Every interaction adds information. Every choice creates consequence. The buffer fills again. Alignment fades. This is not failure. It is rhythm. The universe does not move toward stillness. It moves through cycles of congestion and clearance. Alignment is a phase, not a destination, which makes it precious, but not possessible. Trying to hold alignment turns it into desire. Desire fills the buffer. Alignment dissolves. This is the paradox at the heart of many spiritual pursuits. The moment you want alignment, you lose it. Not because it is fragile, but because wanting is unresolved movement. Alignment requires no movement. It requires completion. This brings us to a subtle twist. If alignment depends on integration, and integration depends on delay, then alignment is not achieved by escaping time. It is achieved by honoring time, by letting things finish. This includes experiences you would rather skip. Pain must integrate. Loss must integrate. Change must integrate. Skipping integration does not remove pain. It preserves it. The buffer holds what is unfinished. This explains why people can be outwardly successful and inwardly misaligned. Achievements do not guarantee integration. They may even prevent it. Constant motion prevents clearance. When there is no pause, nothing completes. The buffer becomes permanent. Misalignment becomes identity. This is often mistaken for personality. I am just anxious. 100. I am just restless. The shaft, I am just dissatisfied. End quote. But these are not traits. They are signals that never finished integrating. This perspective removes judgment. You are not broken. You are unfinished. And unfinished does not mean incomplete. It means in process. Alignment is not something you must earn. It's something that arrives when you stop interrupting the process. This interruption often comes from fear. Fear of feeling what has been avoided. Fear of slowing down. Fear of what will surface when noise stops. But what surfaces is not chaos. It is information. Information that was waiting. Once it arrives fully, it leaves. That leaving is alignment. This process can feel uncomfortable at first. When the buffer clears, signals that were suppressed rise. Thoughts surface. Emotions move. This is often misinterpreted as regression. I'm getting worse. Will goo. But what is actually happening is delayed information arriving. Integration has begun. Clarity often comes after confusion. Stillness often comes after agitation. This sequence is not random. It is how delayed systems settle, which means alignment often appears suddenly, not gradually. One moment, the system feels congested. The next, it feels light. People describe this as insight, awakening, or peace, but nothing mystical occurred. The buffer cleared. This clarity can last minutes, hours, sometimes longer. Then, new signals arrive. Life resumes. Integration begins again. This cycle is not something to escape. It is something to understand. Understanding it removes a great deal of suffering. You stop demanding permanent calm. You stop fearing temporary unrest. You see both as phases. This understanding also changes how action feels. When aligned, action is simple. Not because outcomes are certain, but because there is no internal conflict. You do what is available to do. No urgency, no hesitation. Not because you know everything, but because nothing is obstructing response. This is what people often call intuition. But intuition is not foresight. It is unimpeded processing. The system is clear enough to respond without noise. This clarity does not require special insight. It requires completion, which means the path to alignment is not about acquiring more. It is about finishing what has already begun. Finishing conversations, finishing grief, finishing fear, finishing desire. Not by resolving them intellectually, but by allowing them to fully arrive. This takes time. Time is not an enemy here. It is the mechanism. The delayed universe is not rushing you. It is waiting for you to stop rushing yourself. This shift changes the emotional tone of life. You become less reactive, not because you suppress reaction, but because reactions finish. You become less anxious, not because nothing threatens, but because threats are processed. You become less driven, not because you lack purpose, but because purpose has integrated. This does not make life dull. It makes it precise. You respond to what is present, not to what is lingering. This precision feels like freedom. Not freedom from conditions, but freedom from backlog. Which brings us to a deeper implication. If alignment depends on completion, and completion depends on allowing delay, then control has been misunderstood. Control is not directing outcomes. Control is allowing processes to finish without interference. This is difficult in a culture that rewards speed. Speed interrupts integration. Speed creates latency. Ironically, rushing increases delay. This is why slowing down often feels like relief. Not because you are doing less, but because you are allowing more to finish. This reframes rest. Rest is not inactivity. It is integration time. Without rest, the buffer never clears. Misalignment accumulates. This is not a moral failing. It is a scheduling issue. The system needs downtime, which means alignment is not achieved by effort. It is achieved by pacing, by respecting the system's capacity. This insight prepares us for the final transition. If alignment is what remains, when nothing is unresolved, then what happens at the ultimate resolution? What happens when the buffer no longer receives updates? When information stops arriving? When there is nothing left to integrate? This question does not point toward philosophy. It points toward something unavoidable, the one event that ends all delay, the one moment after which no integration remains, the one transition that removes the buffer entirely. To understand the delayed universe fully, we must face that moment, not as fear, not as abstraction, but as structure, because death, too, is not what we think it is. Understanding it will quietly reshape everything that came before. That is where the next chapter begins to draw us. Death does not arrive as an event. It arrives as the end of updates. We imagine death as something that happens, a moment, a crossing, a final experience. But in a delayed universe, death is not a moment inside time. It is the moment time stops arriving. Until that point, life is reception. Signals flow. Information propagates, meaning integrates. Awareness witnesses a continuous stream of delayed reality. Then, one day, the stream ends. Not abruptly, but definitively. No new frames arrive. No further updates propagate. The buffer receives nothing more. What remains is not darkness, not experience, not fear. What remains is the absence of delay. And absence of delay is not something that can be felt, because feeling requires input. This reframes death completely. Death is not an experience you will have. It is the cessation of experience arriving, which means fear of death is not fear of something ahead. It is fear generated now by a system that cannot imagine the absence of reception. The nervous system is built to process signals. The mind is built to integrate meaning. Neither is equipped to conceptualize what happens when signals stop. So fear fills the gap. But that fear does not belong to death. It belongs to the buffer. It is anxiety about a condition the system cannot process. This explains why death anxiety feels abstract, yet deeply unsettling. There is no image that satisfies it, no story that resolves it, because death is not a story. It is the end of stories arriving. Every fear you have about death is constructed from delayed information about life. Pain, loss, separation, absence. These are experiences of living systems. They do not apply beyond reception. Death is not painful. Pain requires signals. Death is not lonely. Loneliness requires awareness of absence. Death is not dark. Darkness requires perception. These descriptions are metaphors, borrowed from life, and projected forward. But projection stops where propagation stops. This does not make death comforting. It makes it structurally neutral, which is unsettling in its own way. Because neutrality offers no handle for control. You cannot prepare for death the way you prepare for an event. You can only prepare to stop preparing. This is why cultures surround death with ritual. Ritual is not for the dead, it is for the living buffer. It provides integration for those still receiving updates. Death ends delay for one system, but multiplies delay for others. Grief is the delayed integration of loss, not because loss happened, but because meaning is still arriving. The person is gone, but information about them continues to propagate. Memories surface, habits echo, expectations persist. The buffer holds a presence that reality no longer updates. This mismatch is grief. Grief is not about the dead. It is about latency. It is the system receiving signals from a source that will never update again. Over time, the system learns this. Expectations adjust. Signals diminish. Integration completes. This is not forgetting. It is synchronization. The living system updates its model of reality, which means grief ends. Not when pain stops, but when delay resolves. This reframes mourning. There is no correct timeline. Integration takes as long as it takes. Trying to hurry grief creates more unresolved information. Trying to suppress it preserves outdated models. Healing does not mean moving on. It means allowing the system to finish updating its understanding, which brings us back to death itself. If death is the end of updates, then life is not defined by experiences. It is defined by reception. Life is not what happens to you. Life is what reaches you. This changes how meaning is understood. Meaning is not found in events. It is found in integration. And integration only occurs while reception continues. This means the value of life is not in its permanence, but in its capacity to receive, to feel, to integrate, to learn. Life is valuable because delay exists, because there is time between what happens and what is understood. Without that time, nothing would matter. This is why urgency around death often feels misplaced. People rush to make life count, as if value were something to be achieved before time runs out. Value is not accumulated, it is experienced. Every moment of reception is already complete in itself. You do not need to add meaning to life. Life is meaning integrating itself, which suggests something quietly radical. If death ends reception, then nothing is lost at the moment of death. Loss is something the living experience, not something the dead undergo. This does not diminish loss. It relocates it. Loss belongs to the buffer. It belongs to delay, which means death itself is not a tragedy for the one who dies. Tragedy unfolds in the wake, in the delayed ripples, through other systems. Understanding this does not remove sadness. It clarifies where sadness lives. It lives here. Now, in reception, this clarity can soften fear, not eliminate it. Fear is part of reception too. But fear no longer needs to imagine an experience that will never occur. Death is not something you will encounter. It is the absence of encountering. This distinction matters because it shifts how you relate to life. If death is not an experience, then living does not need to outrun it. You do not need to get ahead of death. There is no ahead. There is only reception until reception ends. This removes a subtle pressure, the pressure to finish everything, to resolve everything, to understand everything. Nothing in a delayed universe is ever fully resolved. Integration is ongoing. Completion is rare, and death does not demand completion. It simply ends the process. This perspective allows something else to emerge. If nothing needs to be finished before death, then life does not need to be rushed. Urgency becomes optional. You do not need to consume experience. Experience arrives. You do not need to extract meaning. Meaning integrates. Your task is not to maximize life, but to remain receptive. This receptivity is what gives life depth, not achievements, not accumulation. Reception, which is quietly liberating. You stop treating life as a project and begin treating it as a transmission. You are receiving something vast, complex, unfinished. You do not need to perfect it. You need to listen. This listening is what awareness already does, which means awareness is not preparing for death. It is already aligned with it. Awareness does not depend on content. It is present for whatever arrives. And when nothing arrives, there is nothing to witness. No resistance, no fear, just cessation. This is difficult to imagine because imagination requires content, but lack of imagination is not danger. It is simply the boundary of reception, which brings us to a subtle shift. If death is the end of updates, then life is not a march toward nothingness. It is a window of reception. Finite, yes, but not fragile. Every moment received is complete. Nothing is missing from it, which means the idea of wasting time loses its sting. You cannot waste reception. You can only receive or be distracted from receiving. Distraction does not shorten life. It changes what integrates. This changes how choices feel. You are not choosing how long you live. You are choosing how clearly you receive. Clarity does not extend life. It deepens it. This is why moments of deep presence feel timeless. Not because time stops, but because reception is unimpeded. The buffer is clear. Life arrives fully. This is the opposite of rushing, which means death, paradoxically, invites slowness. Not because time is scarce, but because reception is precious, and reception cannot be forced. It can only be allowed. This understanding prepares the ground for the final transition. If death ends delay and life is delayed reception, then the universe itself may not be what we think it is. Perhaps the universe is not something we inhabit. Perhaps it is something we receive. And if that is true, then reality is not outside us, nor inside us. It is upstream, always ahead, always arriving. And we are not participants in its unfolding. We are witnesses to its echoes. To understand what that means, for meaning, for identity, for the quiet act of living, we must step back one final time and look at the entire structure as a whole, because everything we have explored points toward a single, unsettling conclusion, one that does not close the story, but opens it completely. That is where the next chapter begins to dissolve into view. The universe is not something you are inside. It is something you are receiving. This thought destabilizes almost every familiar picture. We imagine space as a container, time as a path, ourselves as travelers moving through it. But nothing we have explored supports this image. You do not move through time. Time arrives to you. You do not occupy reality. Reality reaches you, always late, always partial. always processed. The universe, as you know it, is not the universe as it is. It is the universe as it has managed to arrive, which means what you call reality is not a place. It is a transmission. This transmission does not come all at once. It comes filtered, delayed, translated. Light carries information. Matter carries constraint. Memory carries compression. By the time something becomes experience, it has already been reduced, not diminished, shaped. This shaping is not deception. It is necessity. A system cannot receive infinity, so the universe sends summaries, echoes, frames. You live in those frames, and those frames feel complete only because you have never seen the source. This is why the universe feels stable, not because it is static, but because updates arrive slower than change occurs. The universe is always ahead of you, not metaphorically, structurally, which means the question, "Where am I in the universe?" end quote, has been misframed. You are not located. You are synchronized imperfectly, always trailing, always catching up. This reframes existence itself. You are not a being in a world. You are a receiving node in an unfolding system. Your senses are antennas. Your mind is a decoder. Your identity is a compressed archive of what has already passed through. This does not reduce you. It repositions you. You are not small because the universe is large. You are local because the universe is too vast to arrive all at once. Local does not mean insignificant. It means precise. This also reframes consciousness. Consciousness is not an emergent miracle inside a mechanical universe. It is the interface through which delay becomes livable. Without consciousness, latency would be meaningless. With it, latency becomes experience. You are not conscious. Despite delay, you are conscious. Because of it, this is why a perfectly synchronized universe would be uninhabitable if everything arrived instantly. Nothing could be noticed. No anticipation, no memory, no learning. Meaning requires separation. Meaning requires time between happening and knowing, which means the delayed universe is not broken. It is tuned for experience. This insight changes how isolation feels. You are not alone. Because you are separate from the universe, you are separate, so that the universe can be experienced at all. Distance is not abandonment. Distance is bandwidth management. This also changes how insignificance is understood. People feel insignificant because the universe does not respond. But response is not required. The universe is not listening. It is broadcasting. And you are receiving. Reception does not require acknowledgement. A signal does not need to know who receives it to be meaningful. Meaning happens at the receiver, which means your experience matters. Not because the universe notices it, but because it occurs. Occurrence is enough. This shifts the weight of existence. You stop asking, "What does this mean to the universe?" end quote, and start asking, "What is this becoming in me?" It's prose. Because meaning is not upstream. It is downstream. Always downstream. This reframing dissolves a subtle despair. The despair that comes from believing you must matter cosmically to matter at all. But mattering does not require scale. It requires reception. A single mind receiving a moment is sufficient for meaning to exist. Meaning does not accumulate globally. It integrates locally. This makes each life complete in itself, not because it is long, not because it is remembered, but because it receives. This also alters how truth is understood. Truth is not something you uncover. It is something that reaches you. Partial, contextual, time-bound. You never know the whole truth. No one does. Not because truth is hidden, but because arrival is limited. which means humility is not moral. It is structural. Certainty is always premature. The universe has not finished arriving. That's why dogma feels brittle. It mistakes partial reception for totality. It treats a snapshot as the source. But snapshots are downstream. They are never final. This perspective softens belief. Beliefs become provisional. Stories become tools, not prisons. You stop clinging to interpretations as if they were reality. You recognize them as arrivals. This also reframes suffering. Suffering is not proof that reality is hostile. It is often proof that information has not finished integrating. Pain does not mean something is wrong. It means something is still arriving, which means the opposite of suffering is not pleasure. It is completion. When information completes its passage, pain resolves into understanding. Understanding does not erase pain retroactively, but it dissolves its grip. This understanding changes how resilience works. Resilience is not toughness. It is permeability. The ability to let information pass through without becoming stuck. Rigid systems suffer more. They resist arrival. They congest. Flexible systems clear faster. They align, which means fragility is not weakness. It is openness without support. Support allows openness to remain flexible. This is why connection matters. Not because humans need validation, but because integration is easier in shared buffers. Meaning stabilizes faster when reception is mirrored, which means conversation is not about agreement. It is about synchronization. Two systems aligning their delays. This also reframes love. Love is not fusion. It is mutual reception. Two systems receiving reality together, knowing they are both late. This shared lateness creates intimacy, not certainty. Intimacy does not come from knowing the truth. It comes from receiving together, which means loneliness is not lack of people. It is lack of shared integration. You can be surrounded and still alone in delay, or alone and deeply connected through resonance. This is why art feels universal. Art is delayed, meaning encoded intentionally. It reaches across time. It synchronizes buffers that never met. The artist is gone. The signal arrives, meaning integrates, which means nothing truly disappears until it stops being receivable. This reframes legacy. Legacy is not memory. It is propagation. What you release into the world does not need to be remembered by you to matter. It needs to be received by someone, even once. This does not guarantee permanence. Nothing does. But permanence is not the measure of meaning. Arrival is, which brings us to a quiet, unsettling calm. If the universe is always ahead, if reality is always arriving, if meaning is always downstream, then there is nothing you are supposed to catch up to. No ultimate understanding waiting at the end. No final alignment. The universe does not culminate. It continues. And you receive until you do not. This removes the pressure to resolve existence. Existence is not a problem. It is a transmission. Your role is not to solve it. Your role is to receive it as clearly as you can. While it arrives, this clarity does not require brilliance. It requires honesty. Honesty about delay. Honesty about incompleteness. Honesty about not knowing. Not knowing is not ignorance. It is accuracy. This realization is not dramatic. It does not announce itself. It settles. Like dust after motion, you feel less compelled to grasp, less compelled to rush, less compelled to define yourself. You are receiving something vast. You do not need to own it. You do not need to explain it. You only need to allow it to arrive. And when it does, moment by moment, frame by frame, echo by echo, that arrival is your life. Not as a story, not as an achievement, but as an experience of reception inside a universe that is always quietly just ahead. And this leaves one final gentle question. If reality is always upstream, if experience is always delayed, if meaning always arrives late, then perhaps the present moment is not where life happens. Perhaps it is where life is finally noticed. And if that is true, then nothing you have experienced was ever out of place. Nothing arrived too late. Nothing was missed. Everything that reached you did so at the only time it ever could, which is exactly where the final chapter begins to breathe. Nothing ever happened when you thought it did. Every moment you remember arrived after it was already gone. Every feeling you trusted was an echo, not the event. And yet, this has never made life unreal. It has made it possible. The present moment is not the edge of existence. It is the point where existence becomes noticeable, not where reality begins, but where it finally reaches you. You have never lived in the universe itself. You have lived in its delay, in the space where signals slow enough to become meaning. This delay is not a flaw. It is the condition for experience. If reality arrived instantly, there would be no awareness to receive it. If knowing and happening were the same, nothing could be felt. So the universe keeps its distance, not to abandon you, but to allow you. Distance creates time. Time creates integration. Integration creates meaning, and meaning creates a life. This is why the present moment has always felt strange. It is never sharp, never final, never complete. It feels like something settling, like dust in light. That is because the present moment is not a moment at all. It is a threshold, a narrow band where what has happened finally becomes understandable. You stand there constantly, not moving forward, not falling behind, receiving. This changes how memory feels. The past is not behind you. It is inside you, still arriving. Some memories feel vivid because they have not finished integrating. Others fade because they have. Nothing is truly gone until its meaning completes. And the future is not ahead of you. It is upstream, already forming, already happening, already becoming something else. But none of that matters yet because it has not reached you. You do not need to prepare for the future. You cannot receive it early. You will only receive it when delay allows. This releases a subtle tension, the need to be ready, the need to understand, the need to stay ahead. Ahead of what? Reality is always ahead. You were never meant to catch it. You were meant to notice it as it arrives. This reframes regret. You did not fail to act in time. You acted with what had reached you. Understanding arrived later because it could not arrive sooner. This reframes fear. Fear does not predict danger. It remembers unresolved information. Fear quiets when integration completes. This reframes desire. Desire does not promise fulfillment. It signals unfinished movement. Desire dissolves when understanding arrives. This reframes identity. You are not who you think you are. You are who you have managed to integrate. And you are still integrating. This reframes control. You cannot control outcomes. You can only allow processes to finish. This reframes meaning. Meaning is not assigned. It is received. Slowly. Late. Which is exactly how it must be. If you feel behind in life, it is because you believe there is a real-time version you are failing to inhabit. But no such version exists. No one is there. Everyone is here, receiving. Some receive chaos. Some receive clarity. Some receive silence. Not because reality is unfair, but because arrival is uneven. And uneven arrival is what creates individuality. You are not meant to receive what others receive. You are meant to receive what reaches you. That is enough. This understanding does not solve life. It softens it. It removes the accusation that you should be somewhere else, someone else, already finished. Nothing is finished. Not you, not the universe. Everything is still arriving. And one day, for you, arrival will stop. Not as darkness, not as loss, as silence. Not silence you will hear. Silence because nothing more will need to be received. Until then, there is only this delayed moment, this gentle lag, this quiet unfolding. You are not late. You have never been late. You are exactly where reception happens. And even now, as these words fade, as understanding settles a little deeper, as meaning continues to integrate, the universe is already moving on, not away from you, ahead of you, waiting patiently for you to notice it again.